If you like the story, you can support the author on Patreon. Link is in the description.
Chapter 56, The Greatest Creation. Next morning, Cassian sat on the rug, stared at the remains of what had once been the single greatest logic-activated defense ward Hogwarts had seen since ever, and made a long, guttural noise that probably translated to "Why, God, why?" Parchment. Ruined. Ink everywhere. One diagram looked like someone had summoned a jellyfish into a meat grinder. Another had a faint boot print over the delicate curvature of a rune that was supposed to control directional tethering. He grabbed the most intact sheet and held it up with reverence. "No," he whispered, heartbroken. His hair was sticking in 6 different directions. "No, it was the best plan in the world." The parchment sagged in agreement. "I was going to turn a whole corridor into a recursive false reality loop with semantic triggers and a conditional memory fog, but no." He stabbed a finger at the floor. Now it smelled of sweat, ink, and pure betrayal. Bath's Haida padded in, half wrapped in one of his cloaks, very smug. She glanced at the mess, picked up a singed pen with 2 fingers, and let it drop again. Cassian held up the page like it was a dead pet. She sipped his leftover tea. Didn't even blink. "I mourn it," he said solemnly. "You will live," she said, already walking off to Bath. "I will not," he called after her. "I am artistically destroyed. A victim of my own lust." He rubbed at his temple. There was ink on his cheek. He wiped it, then made it worse. Then sat back and sighed, dramatic as hell. Fantastic. A masterpiece in failure. He eventually cleaned it up. Sort of. Gathered the wreckage into a stack that leaned like a guilty secret and nudged it toward the bin with his foot. The ruined ink smeared across his palm as he carried the parchment over, dark and sticky. He paused halfway. Stared at the bin. Then shoved the stack onto the nearest bookshelf instead, between How Not to Wake What Sleeps and a cursed copy of Wandless Wonders, A Study in Hubris. He turned to leave and promptly tripped on a loose bootlace. Swore violently. Kicked the table leg. The table, innocent as a nun, retaliated by spilling a half-dried rune plate across the floor. Cassian stopped, took a breath, and let the self-anger settle. "All right," he said aloud to no one, "we are calling this a teaching moment. Don't ward spell drunk on lust. Or at all, apparently." Thursday brought the first years. Gryffindor and Slytherin. Brilliant bunch for a slow, civilized morning. Cassian stood outside the classroom, flicking through his register and sipping tea that had somehow gone cold despite the self-warming charm. Hogwarts air did that, sucked the warmth out of everything. He was curious. Not because of the clash of houses or the shiny, wide-eyed optimism most first years dragged in by the cauldron. No, it was one boy in particular. Black hair. Skinny frame. Lightning bolt. Name everyone whispered like he sneezed gold. Harry Potter. Cassian had a vague cultural memory of a scarred orphan and a dark lord with fashion issues, but no real opinion. Now, seeing the boy in person, yet. Looked small. Not fragile. Just young. Okay, maybe fragile too. And very lost in the crowd of oversized robes and pointy hats. He let them settle first. Watching them pour in, half tripping over bags, half fighting for seats. Malfoy sauntered in like he owned the place already. Potter shuffled in 2 steps behind, flanked by the Weasley boy with the hair like sunset vomit and a girl whose bag looked heavier than her spine. No one spoke. Cassian set his tea down on the desk. Pulled out his wand. Pointed to the board. The chalk flew up and scratched out 2 lines. Hogwarts, a history. He walked the aisle like a general reviewing a battalion of badly disguised puppies. "I am Professor Cassian Rosier," he said, pausing halfway down. "You can call me Professor Rosier." From the back Malfoy jabbed the thick-shouldered bloke beside him, grinning like he just discovered sarcasm. The third boy laughed too loud. Cassian didn't slow. Mudblood and Squib lover weren't words that would fly unpunished in his class. He flicked his wand toward them before the last syllable had died. 3 sharp pops cracked the air, like corks pulled from stubborn bottles. All 3 boys clutched their throats. Silence. Their mouths moved. Nothing came out. Cassian, still walking, caught the 3 floating puffs of light that had risen from their throats. Each faint and buzzing like a trapped fly. He dragged them to his palm, split them apart and pulled 3 glass bottles from his coat like he was laying out condiments. Pop. 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 One bottled voice per troublemaker. He placed the jars neatly on his desk as neatly as prized potions. Right then. I have your voices, he said, spinning one with a finger. Try not to need them before supper. He looked at the trio, faces pale, eyes wide, and gave them a bright, teacherly smile. Be respectful in my classes. Or I may keep them indefinitely. I am quite the collector. He awakened the ancient variant of Silencio 2 days ago. Amphora vox. Nasty piece of work if you didn't know what you were doing, and even nastier if you did. It bottled the target's voice, literally. Cassian had been teaching Silencio for 2 years now, watching it hover at the edge of his interface like a moth pacing a flame. Knew it was going to happen sooner or later. The second repeater session with older students had done it. Right, Cassian said, tapping the board. We will start with a bit of introduction. Hogwarts, its history, a few ugly secrets, and some flattering lies. Standard issue. The bushy-haired girl near the front, Granger, if he remembered right, was practically vibrating. She already had a quill in hand, parchment rolled flat, eyes locked on him like he might start reciting from scripture. Brilliant. Hogwarts, he began, was founded over 1,000 years ago by 4 people who couldn't agree on wallpaper, let alone the curriculum. Salazar Slytherin, Godric Gryffindor, Rowena Ravenclaw, and Helga Hufflepuff. You heard of them? Big names. Statues. Bad fashion sense. Some of them laughed. He tilted his head. Ever wondered how all their first names and surnames start with the same letter? Salazar Slytherin. Godric Gryffindor. Bit tidy, isn't it? Sounds fake. Granger gasped, hand flying to her mouth as if he slapped a library. She looked genuinely wounded. Cassian held up both hands. I am not saying they weren't real. Just, look, you expect me to believe 4 founders with matching initials and dramatic flair met in a swamp and built a school? Either fate got a punchline, or the ministry's been sanitizing history harder than a purebloods vault audit. No one moved, but they all wore the same expression, already brainwashed, ready to defend their house's founder with their lives. Cassian dropped into his chair, one arm slung across the backrest. All right, settle. The shiny story in Hogwarts, a history, the one where they all held hands and sang Unity while laying bricks is absolute tosh. They fought. Loudly. Repeatedly. And someone definitely tried to hex someone else's livestock during the planning stages. Seamus blinked. Wait. Livestock. Don't act like you never seen a wizard duel involving goats. Lavender leaned forward. You are saying the founders didn't get along? Cassian snorted. Of course not. He flicked his wand in a wide arc. Light danced in the air, curling like smoke before taking shape. 4 figures formed in the air, shimmering shapes that sharpened as the glow settled. Godric Gryffindor came first, tall and broad. His sword was strapped across his back, face set like he was already itching for a fight. Next, Salazar Slytherin, posture perfect. Rowena Ravenclaw hovered behind them, eyes needle-sharp. Last came Helga Hufflepuff. Shorter, warmer, with kind eyes and a practical braid. Looked like she could hug you or hex you depending on what mood she was in. The 4 of them were rowing. The boat rocked wildly as Gryffindor stood to shout over Ravenclaw. Cassian gestured lazily, and the illusion tilted, sending imaginary water lapping over. Then, casually added, I am making most of this up, by the way. That earned more than a few raised brows. Real history rarely talks about the day-to-day, he continued, gesturing at the founders now rowing in increasingly uncoordinated rhythms. You get dates, wars, inventions, bloodlines. You don't get arguments over boat paddles or spatial charm ratios or whose idea it was to drag goats into the planning meetings. Only hint of them in the subtext. He tapped the side of his head. But trust me, if 4 overpowered idealists built a school in the middle of nowhere, they definitely fought over everything from wall colors to how many towers counted as too many. Longbottom leaned forward. So none of this is real. Cassian shrugged. The broad strokes are true. The rest? Well, let's just say history leaves gaps. I fill them with informed nonsense. He paused, then added with a grin, when you read books, keep in mind, whoever wrote it was probably as generous as me. A few students laughed. One looked horrified. Cassian winked. Welcome to critical thinking. He let them sit with it then continued. According to the cleaned-up version, Cassian said, nodding toward the scene, they met under a shooting star, shared a vision, and rode to the shore with unity in their hearts and purpose in their eyes. He turned back to the class. In reality, Godric forgot the paddles, Salazar tried to make the boat fly, Rowena kept arguing about spatial ratios, and Helga had to stop them from drowning twice. He then shrugged. Well, we will get back to that. With a flick, he split the illusion straight down the middle. Another twitch of the wand and the thing evaporated. Students looked like he sliced the scene in half and hid the ending under his desk. He didn't care. Cliffhangers build character. Tradition says the victor writes history. Right to win. W2W. Chapter 57, Why? Hello everyone. This chapter includes an exercise I've used before in another class and setting, but I wanted to highlight a few points, so I decided to reuse it. That said, even without the exercise, this chapter is still longer than my usual ones. Just so you know. I hope you enjoy it. I really love reading your comments. I usually reply with just an emote to show I've seen them, since I try to avoid saying too much and risk spoiling something by accident. Thank you so much for all the support. Cassian perched on the desk, kicked one leg over the side, and aimed his attention straight at the girl practically vibrating out of her seat. Ms. Granger, he said. You are Muggle-born, correct? She blinked like he asked if she breathed air. Yes, sir. Lovely. Can you tell me why you are using a quill? Hermione hesitated, glancing at her parchment, the quill in her hand, then back at him. Because, it is traditional. That is a polite way of saying we are doing it because someone dead said we should. He dove a hand into his coat pocket and pulled out a pen. Actual pen. Biro, blue ink, plastic so cheap it squeaked if you flexed it. Held it up like a wand. Do you know why magics use quills to write? Hermione blinked, straightened. Her brain made that little whirring sound it did before a fact came flying out like shrapnel. Hogwarts, A History, page 76. Quills are magically conductive. They allow passive enchantments to interact with the script as it is being written. Cassian nodded. Very good memorization. She smiled. He sighed. Then why do you think I use a Muggle pen? She paused. A second passed. Then another. Her hand twitched like it wanted to reach for a book, which was useless. No book would explain it. He turned to the others. Can anyone guess? Half the room blinked. Tracy Davis bit the end of her quill, squinting at the pen in his hand. Dean leaned forward, clearly itching to guess but not quite confident enough to risk it. Seamus, of course, had no such reservations. Because you are a Muggle lover. He said, grinning. Cassian snapped a finger at him. Wrong. I mean I do love them but not the reason. Millicent scoffed. Because you are lazy. Ooh, Cassian winced. Closer. Hermione hesitated again. He didn't look at her. Let her stew. Let the answer itch at her temple. The rest sat quiet. None of you? Cassian asked, looking mildly insulted. Come on. Thought this was supposed to be the clever year. He tossed the pen in the air and caught it behind his back. The twins from Gryffindor would have applauded, but none of these Slytherins were in the mood. Neither was Hermione, who looked like the internal debate between speak and don't be that student was actively causing her pain. Cassian looked at Harry. Mr. Potter, any guess? Harry raised his head, eyes flicking to the board, then back to Cassian, weighing whether answering would be a trap. Because writing with quills is a pain in the back, he said, and we don't need magical conductivity in History of Magic. Cassian clapped slowly but loudly. 10 points to Gryffindor. A few heads snapped towards Harry. Ron looked like someone had just announced his rat could do algebra. Granger whipped round to stare at Harry as if he'd started speaking Parseltongue. Magic doesn't automatically flow into your homework, Miss Granger, Cassian added, pacing past her desk. Even when it is drowning in citations. Especially then, in fact. She looked ready to argue. Probably would have, if her parchment hadn't been halfway to exploding under how hard she was writing. Cassian swung back to the front. The reason I use a pen is very simple, it works. No blotting, no charm needed to keep the ink from running, and if it explodes, it is probably the user's fault. Quills are a fashion statement. Pens are tools. Neville raised a hand. What happens if you write a spell with one? Cassian scratched his jaw. Nothing, unless you enchant the ink. Which is a bad idea, by the way. Leads to screaming letters, exploding pens, and the occasional demon contract if you are not careful. Dean snickered, a few also hid their laugh behind their hands. He then sighed, long and theatrical. Right then. How many of you have ever actually experienced Muggle culture? Not just walked past a telly in a shop window, proper, hands-on experience. Microwaves, buses, awkward conversations with people who don't believe dragons are real. A few hands went up. Hermione's, obviously. Dean Thomas too. Harry, surprisingly. Cassian raised an eyebrow at that one. He would think that later. So, he went on, you lot know they are not living in huts, scrawling on cave walls, yet? Don't let your textbooks convince you otherwise. The Muggle world is a nightmare of traffic, capitalism, and fast food, but it is clever as hell. Give them a few decades and they will accidentally invent a thermonuclear kettle. Hermione made a noise. It wasn't a gasp, but it had the energy of someone watching a bookshelf being set on fire. Her hand shot up before he even finished. Yes, Miss Granger. She stood up like this was court. Are you saying that books? Her nose crinkled. She looked like she licked something sour and wanted to blame the ink. That books are wrong. Cassian stared at her. Then gave a low whistle. Blasphemy, I know. Heresy in parchment form. He crossed his arms, all mock gravity. But answer me this. If I wrote a book, me, personally, and filled it cover to cover with lies, half-truths, and a wildly flattering portrait of myself riding a griffin, claiming I tackled a werewolf, pinned it with one hand, pressed my wand to its neck, and then turned back into a human. Would that be true, or flattering fiction? Hermione's mouth opened. Nothing came out. He grinned. Exactly. She sat back down hard. Books, he continued, pacing again, are written by people. And people are messy. They get things wrong. They lie. They twist stories to make themselves look heroic or clever or slightly less racist. History is full of it. You know how many kings died mysteriously and right after their nephews disappeared? We call that natural causes in the official records. Neville blinked. But, isn't Hogwarts a history written by someone who was here? Cassian turned to him, nodded solemnly. Yep. And she left out the bit where a hippogriff got loose in the second-floor corridor and started stealing everyone's shoes. Whole year of barefoot students. Not a word about it. Cassian grabbed a piece of chalk, stabbing it at the board. Here is the thing, and pay attention because it will come up again, knowledge isn't truth. Not by default. It is memory, rewritten by bias, fear, power, and someone with a quill deciding which bits get remembered. He turned back to them. The founders didn't like each other. That whole United Front story. Rubbish. Salazar tried to hex Helga's badger once. Rowena threatened to move the entire school to the sky because she got bored of the lake. And Godric, well, Godric challenged a ghost to a drinking contest. And lost. Blaise raised a hand. But ghosts can't drink. Cassian pointed at him. Exactly. The room went quiet for a second. Then Parvati giggled. That set off Lavender. They were all true, or maybe not. He read them in a book from the forbidden section. Who knew if author was pulling them from his back or was actually there? History, he said, letting the word sit for a moment, isn't a list of dates and facts. It is a battleground. People fighting over what gets remembered. And in this castle? It is practically a war zone. He paced to the back of the room again, and leaned over Malfoy's desk, making the poor boy flinch. Right. An exercise from last year. He didn't wait for interest to rise. 30 points to whoever manages to get their name into this cup. That got their attention. He pulled his wand and flicked, a pale blue ring flared and hovered around the cup. This, Cassian said, is an age line. Prevents you from stepping in unless you are of a certain age. He folded his arms, eyeing the class. What do you do? Harry blinked at the glowing line. Goyle leaned in, fascinated. Hermione raised her hand so fast she nearly hit Parvati in the nose. Ron half raised his hand, Cassian waved him off. Mr. Weasley, you are not to open your mouth. I know your brothers spoke about it non-stop. The boy deflated, watching the others intently, as if trying to pass his knowledge to his fellow Gryffindors telepathically. Yes, Miss Granger. Let's have the obvious answer. Break the ward. She said, already speaking before he even finished. Cassian nodded slowly. All right. Bold. Brute force. Sure. Try that, and enjoy the magical backlash rearranging your face. Not recommended. Malfoy raised his hand, scowling like he was about to say something nasty. Too bad, nothing came out. He scowled harder. Pointed at his throat. Glared at Cassian. Cassian didn't even bother looking up. What? Malfoy dropped his hand, jaw clenched. Goyle gave him a helpless shrug. Cassian tapped the glass jar nearest him. I will give you your voices. But behave. I am not above keeping one as a souvenir. He didn't wait for a response. Just waved his wand, and the jars popped open with a hiss. 3 bubbles floated like fairies. Their voices returned. Malfoy made a sound halfway between a cough and a curse. Cassian waved his hand. You are welcome. You find the caster, Malfoy finally said, and get them to lift the ward. Cassian tilted his head. Cheat by authority. Very Slytherin. Unfortunately, not always an option in the real world. Imagine needing to raid a tomb and asking the dead for permission. Draco opened his mouth again. Cassian moved on. Tracy Davis crossed her arms. Get someone older to do it for you. Delegation, Cassian said. Smart. Lazy. Might work. Might also get you caught and both expelled. Hogwarts loves shared punishment. Builds unity. Neville looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him. He eyed the ring warily, like it might leap up and bite him. Dean Thomas raised a tentative hand. Go in under an invisibility cloak. Cassian blinked. To trick a magical field that sees your age as a metaphysical constant. Dean lowered his hand without a word. You are all approaching it like it is a wall, Cassian said. But it is not. It is a filter. Age, in this context, is just a trigger. Magic doesn't care about birthdays. It reads maturity, magical development, body signature. Not squinted. So, get older. Brilliant, Cassian said. Wait 10 years. Easy points. Hermione raised her hand again. What about potions? Something to increase age temporarily. Bit dangerous, he said. And you would have to brew it yourself, which is already a death sentence for half of you. He flicked his wand again, and a second circle appeared around the first, fainter, thinner. Then a third. Concentric rings, each one humming differently. Here is the twist, he said. Each ring reads something else. Age. Intention. Magical stability. You might cross 1. 2, if you're clever. But all 3. He stepped back. So. How do you do it? Harry raised his hand. Cassian spotted the crumpled scrap of parchment in his grip and raised an eyebrow. He smirked. Come forward, Mr. Potter. Show us how it is done. Harry stood up, hesitant. The class was half waiting for him to get hexed. He stood outside the rings, paper still clutched in his hand, and stared down at the 3 concentric wards like they might start hissing. Cassian gestured. Any time now. No pressure. Just your academic dignity on the line. Taking a deep breath, Harry tossed the crumpled bit of parchment from outside the ring. It hit the rim of the cup, then dropped straight into the tea with a soft plunk. The whole class watched like he just thrown a coin into a cursed well. Cassian leaned his ear. Right, Mr. Potter, what was that? Harry gave a shrug, quiet. Said to get it in the cup. Didn't say you had to walk it in. Cassian grinned. Another 30 points to Gryffindor. Sit back. Harry rubbed the back of his head and shuffled back to his seat, ears tinged pink. Cassian stepped to the front, arms stretched out like a preacher about to baptize a room full of chaos. Never lose your imagination. Never lose your ability to question authority. Never lose your clever ideas. He glanced across the room, eyes dragging across the house colors. Books, school, teachers, endless essays, all lovely, sure, but they will try to shape you. Into themselves. Into systems. Into people who nod politely when asked to swallow absolute bollocks. Don't fall for it. Don't bend yourself to fit into someone else's bloody filing cabinet. His tone got louder, sharper. Done with pretending the world made sense. You are not here to become a copy of someone who came before. You are not here to impress ghosts. He took another step. Getting closer. We came into this world different. Different shapes. Different colors. Different voices. Some of you are loud. Some quiet. Some of you already think in spells. Some of you still can't charm a feather without it catching fire. Yes, Mr. Finnegan, I heard. Seamus scratched his nose and looked pointedly at the floor. He waved his wand. The chalk sprang up again, scribbled a new phrase across the board. Think. Question. Never blindly obey. You lot, he said, pointing loosely at them, make this world interesting. Not because you are clever, though some of you are. Not because you are powerful, though half of you will probably end up in detention for accidentally hexing yourselves. No. Because you still got that lovely, dangerous thing called curiosity. Hermione looked like she was either going to cry or tattoo the quote on her arm. Dean leaned back in his seat, grinning. Malfoy scowled harder. All right. Before I start getting sappy and someone reports me for emotional damage, homework. A chorus of groans rose. He raised one brow. You thought you would get away without it? Adorable. Half a scroll, Cassian said, on a magical invention or spell you think was either a brilliant accident or an utter disaster. Doesn't have to be in the curriculum. Impress me. Bonus points if I haven't heard of it before. Negative points if you copy out of magical mishaps and mayhem. Seamus raised a tentative hand. Can we write about that ghost with the exploding teapot? You can. But if it is not properly sourced, I will assume you made it up and dock house points. Or worse, invite the ghost. Seamus looked delighted and vaguely alarmed. Cassian glanced at the clock. 5 minutes left. Enough time to cause a minor existential crisis. He leaned both hands on the desk. Now. One more thing before I kick you out. He pointed at the board again, a single word appeared. Why? That is it, he said. Why? That is the question. You ask it enough times, you find the roots of anything. Why was Hogwarts founded? Why were those four allowed to build it? Why are some spells legal and some not? Why do we teach children to make things explode before we teach them how to think? He crossed his arms. Start asking why and you will scare people. Especially adults. Especially ones in power. They like it when you memorize. Not so much when you ask where the memory came from. He heard Weasley whisper to Potter, "We are bloody 11." But he ignored it. Cassian pushed off the desk. Right then. That is enough life-altering perspective for one morning. Out. There was the usual chaos of bags and feet and someone knocking over an ink pot. Homework due next Tuesday, Cassian called over the noise. Don't insult me with excuses. Once they all spilled out, Cassian dropped back into his chair, leaning back. He rubbed his temple, wondering how long it would take for Potter to start mimicking the others. When the messy thinking would be scraped out of him by too many points, too many eyes, too many people trying to shape him into something useful. 3 months, he muttered. Maybe 2 if he joins a club. Check here. It's fine, really. Scholars have been ignored for centuries. You're just keeping the tradition alive. Chapter 58, Between the Lines Number 1, Slytherin vs Badger, read after ch 56. Hello everyone. A little late, but finally here, the exclusives and side stories. These are pieces that don't quite sit in the mainline chapters, but still matter. Think of them as moments that give more light, and a few shadows, around Cassian's world. What counts as a side story? Events from Cassian's classes. Mentions such as Regulus's raid on Malfoy Manor. POV shifts. Founder histories and restricted section finds. They won't be filler. They'll be the kind of scenes you've asked about. What happened there? What did he really find? What did the others see? And sometimes just the sort of petty detail Cassian himself would jot in the margins. Starting with the first one now. After learning Hogwarts itself was basically one enormous contraceptive charm, Cassian made his way to the library like a man on a mission. For science, of course. If the castle was wired to snuff out accidents with built-in wardcraft, then the restricted section was the obvious next stop. Where else did they keep the real filth? Cassian was snickering, imagining all the juicy gossips, when Madame Pants materialized. She didn't walk out of the shadows so much as condense from them, cardigan weaponized. No food, no laughter, she said tersely. And if you crease a spine, Professor Rosier, I'll bind yours. Cassian raised his pen in solemn salute. My spine is grateful for your vigilance, Madame Pants. She sniffed, adjusted her spectacles, and retreated without turning her back. A tactical withdrawal, not a retreat. The shelves waited. Cassian always imagined the restricted section differently when he was a student. A forbidden vault of dark curses, spines shrieking when opened, secrets coiled like serpents. Now? The books purred. No, really. Cassian looked around, nervously. The shelves vibrated faintly when he walked past. Stop flattering me, he muttered. The vibration grew warmer. Oh, that's not weird at all. He tugged down the first of his quarry, the Charter of Four, a comparative paleography by Euphemia Scribner. The weight nearly dislocated his wrist. 1,000 pages of medieval scrawl dissected with diagrams. The thing smelled of chalk dust and academic despair. Riveting, he muttered, sliding it under his arm. Next came Founding Fables for Young Witches and Wizards. Glossy, cheerful, aggressively wholesome. He flipped it open to a color plate of Salazar Slytherin grinning like a kindly uncle while handing sweets to children. Cassian squinted. Then he added it to the stack. Book 3, On Elitism and the Education of the Magical Child. Author Anonymous. Cassian smirked. Nothing better than watching long-dead administrators argue with their own texts. Fourth, he pulled Rooms That Remember, Protean Architecture at Hogwarts by Persephone Twigg. Now this was fun, speculation, sketches of staircases changing mid-step, a theory about hallways that sulked. He opened at random to a section titled The Seventh Corridor That Wasn't There Yesterday. He closed it immediately and slid it into his coat. If a corridor moves, I'm following. Last, he spotted AutoScript and the Scribe, Self-Writing Quills Through the Ages by Quirinus Fletch. Cassian flipped a few pages. Smug footnotes. Entire chapter on ergonomic quill design. He hated it instantly. Perfect addition. He settled at a table. Cassian knew better than to trust the neatness of archives. History wasn't neutral. It was a battlefield. The founders hadn't been drinking buddies. They'd been egos with wands, arguing their way into a school. Every book here chose a side, polished one truth, buried another. He set the pen against the first page of Scribner's tome, rolling his shoulders. All right, Cassian muttered. Let's see which lies you lot picked. The Charter of Four, a comparative paleography. Cassian tapped the margin with his pen. Euphemia, love, no one is seducing anyone with a serif. He closed the heavy tome, checking the next. He ran his thumb along On Elitism and the Education of the Magical Child, not expecting much. But the prologue, oh, the prologue was something else. Flowery, hagiographic nonsense. It lionized Salazar as the wise shepherd, who discerned the wolf among the lambs. And then, like an afterthought at the bottom of the page, the author tossed in a parenthetical anecdote. One must not judge a statesman by rustic failings, as when he hexed a badger in jest. Cassian froze, eyes narrowing. I'm sorry. What? He read it again, slower. And clear as day. Salazar Slytherin, dignified founder, hardliner on blood purity, reduced in the opening paragraphs to a bloke who once hexed a badger. Cassian got up, not caring that the shelves purred after him like they were in heat. You didn't drop a line like Salazar hexed a badger and expect him to sit calmly with his annotated tea. He scoured the adjacent cases first, not even bothering to check if any of the books bit. Magical minorities of the 10th century, On Beasts and Blunders, epistolary exchanges of the early Hogwarts faculty. Nothing. Nothing. Brief lives of the founders had promise. He flipped to the index, schemed under Slytherin, Salazar. See also, founding conflicts, early discipline records, petty hexes. Petty hexes. Oh, come on, he muttered. Please be real. 15 minutes and 20 books later, he found it. Even his detractors admitted Salazar's wit was quick, though occasionally misapplied. A tavern broadside of the time cruelly alleged he once hexed Helga's tame badger during a dispute. The beast, unimpressed, continued to eat his bootlaces. Cassian blinked. Then blinked again. Oh, absolutely yes, he murmured. That is going in the lecture slides. He turned the book sideways. Checked for sources. Of course there were none. Just a footnote, recounted in F.W. Alehouse Satires and the Wands that wrote them, circa 1134. He scribbled a quick note, cursed the lack of proper citations, then dove into the next promising stack. He needed triangulation. Multiple sources. This couldn't be a one-joke pamphlet. Back at the table, he tossed aside the sugary founding fables for young witches and wizards in favor of the Charter of Four. Dry, diagram-heavy, but near the back, an appendix on behavioral notes regarding founder handwriting. Most of it was tripe. But then, Slytherin's minuscule s fluctuates significantly in post-argument missives. Particularly notable in the weeks following an internal dispute regarding the classification of magical fauna. One letter, see folio 11b, contains a marginal scrawl that reads simply, "She keeps pets. I keep policies." Cassian snorted. That was close enough to a confession, by historical standards. And petty as hell. He liked it. He cracked on elitism and the education of the magical child again. The marginalia was rabid in its defense of Salazar, but the original text was trying too hard. One phrase stood out. And yet, in all public controversies, his restraint was unmatched, excepting, of course, the regrettable incident with the creature, of which much has been exaggerated. Cassian underlined the creature. Then, beneath it, wrote, "Oh, I bet." He sat back, tapping the pen to his chin. 3 sources now. He glanced toward the purring shelves. One more. Just one more to verify. He saw a citation earlier. Restricted section, shelf 7b, row 4, volume 3. Bestiary of elusive beasts. He moved like he was being hunted. He turned pages, letting the illustrations flicker past, a gnarl biting its own tail, a manticore in full opera attire, until he hit Badger. There were 2 full pages. One text. One illustration. The Badger's eyes were squinty and unimpressed. Commonly associated with Helga Hufflepuff, the Badger is a creature of low posture and formidable stubbornness. One anecdote, considered apocryphal but repeated in 3 12th century tavern songs, recounts that Salazar Slytherin once attempted to hex Hufflepuff's personal badger during a heated discussion on colors. The creature was reportedly unaffected and resumed chewing his boots. Slytherin's remarks afterward were not preserved, but several minor scrolls cite a week of cancelled meals and slammed doors. Cassian stared. "Well," he said aloud. "I'll be damned." The badger blinked. He blinked back. He shut the book, carefully, reverently, and slid it into the growing stack. He wasn't sure whether it was satire, sabotage, or sincerity. He didn't care. He had what he needed. Chapter 59, Between the Lines Number 2, Gryffindor vs Ghost, read after ch 56. Cassian was upside down on Bathsheda's couch when she walked in. Feet draped over the back, book balanced against his chest. He didn't move when the door clicked shut behind her. "Did you know," he said, "that Godric Gryffindor once lost a drinking contest to a ghost?" Bathsheba dropped her satchel on the nearest chair and blinked. "That's not a question I was expecting." Cassian wiggled the book in his hands. Appendix D, Marginalia in a Charter of Arms and Illusions. Copied from a source so old the ink tried to eat itself. Author helpfully notes, Gryffindor drank well but not wisely. Ghost couldn't drink, thus no limit. Bathsheba raised both eyebrows. "That is, almost impressive." Cassian sat up too fast and immediately regretted it. He challenged a spectral baron to a mead duel. He tossed the book onto the low table, the page already marked. Cassian flicked his wand toward the center of the room. "Here. Let me demonstrate." A shimmer broke the air. An illusion sparked into life, vivid and ridiculous. A crude tavern, wonky benches, flickering candles, a lopsided Gryffindor flag above the hearth. Cassian conjured 2 figures at a table. One, a wide-shouldered man with a mane of red gold hair and a sword propped against his chair. The other, translucent, floating slightly, adorned in an ancient tunic and smugness. Bathsheba folded onto the rug, laughing. "Is this historically accurate?" Cassian gestured broadly. "Absolutely not. But deeply educational." The Gryffindor figure raised a mug the size of a cauldron. The ghost raised a spectral goblet, faintly glowing. They clinked, mugs passing through each other harmlessly. The first round went down in one gulp. Gryffindor slammed his empty mug down and roared. The ghost nodded politely. Round 6. Gryffindor swayed. The ghost hovered. Round 12. Gryffindor hiccuped. The ghost sipped. By round 20, the founder was flat on the floor, boots in the air, mumbling something about chivalry being overrated. Bath's Haida covered her mouth, trying not to laugh too loud. Cassian smiled wide, adjusted the ghost's crown of wilted mistletoe. "Oh, I'm not done," he said. Apparently, there were witnesses. Helga annotated the back of a bread recipe. Note: Godric still claims he let the ghost win. Also, do not trust him to bake during hangovers. Burned the scones. Again. Bath's Haida cackled. "You made that up." Cassian held up another book. Founding Feasts and Magical Misfires. Footnoted. Possibly embellished. Definitely hilarious. He flicked his wand again. The illusion shifted. Now Gryffindor was trying to fight a broom he thought was the ghost. The ghost just hovered nearby, deadpan. Bath's Haida wiped a tear from the corner of her eye. "Why don't we teach this version of history?" Cassian leaned back on his elbows. "Indeed. Why not?" she hummed. "Might be a better recruitment strategy." Cassian nodded solemnly. "Come to Hogwarts. Lose to a ghost, catch fire, burn breakfast." They both fell into laughter again. The illusion faded as he let the magic go slack, but the grin stayed on his face. "I'm putting it in the lecture," he said. Bath's Haida smirked. "You're gonna get into trouble." "Even better." She picked up the fallen book, flipping through the page he'd marked. Then another. Then another. Her smile turned sly. "You know," she said, tapping the margin, "if we ever host a staff party, we should reenact this." Cassian's eyes lit up. "You, me, Sprout judging from the corner, Snape pretending to be a wine critic. And Flitwick wins the whole thing by quietly finishing a bottle under the table," she finished. Cassian leaned over and bumped her shoulder with his. "History should be proud of us." She looked sideways at him. "We're going to rewrite it in sarcasm and bad illusions." Cassian chuckled. Exactly as it was lived. But then Bath's Haida sobered a little. "So he lost to a ghost that cannot drink. You know how that sounds, right?" Cassian raised a brow. Either Gryffindor was stupendously bad at pretending, or something else is off. Bath's Haida sat back against the couch, arms folded. "All right. Riddle time. Why does one compete with someone who can't drink?" Cassian grinned. "Finally, you say something romantic." She snorted. "Focus." He tapped his chin. Option 1, he faked it. Godric wanted an excuse to pass out and made a show of it. Unlikely. Too proud. Option 2, she offered, he drank himself under to hide something. Shame? Guilt? A wager. Grief, she said quietly. Cassian looked over at her. "You think he was grieving?" Bath's Haida reached for another book, flicked pages. Her voice was softer now. "There's a half-verse in Ballads from the Wandering Years. Mentions Gryffindor raising his cup to a flame long fled, and a hearth grown cold. Some think it was a lost daughter. The records are spotty." Cassian sat up. "Godric lost a child. Maybe. If it's true, it explains a lot. The ghost, that could have been a dare. A distraction." The next hour was quiet. Books shuffled across the rug. Old texts opened and closed. Cassian pulled 3 volumes that hadn't been touched in years, ones with cracked bindings and unfamiliar fonts, all of them mentioned founders. None by name, some just by epithet: the Red Knight, the Fire-Hearted, the Man Who Vanished for Winter. Others were as cryptic: the Mind with Wings, She Who Built in Spirals, the Silence Between Spells. The Hearth Keeper, Friend to the Soil and the Stubborn, the Hand That Fed Wolves. The Oathmaker, He Who Spoke Beneath, the Man Who Taught Shadows to Bow. None of it was definitive. All of it was true. Bath's Haida read aloud a note scribbled in the margin of Wand folklore. He vanished to cry and returned with a sword. The girl had gone. The man was angry. Cassian closed his eyes. That fits. They found one more thing. A faded letter, pressed between 2 pages in first castings and the founding bonds, unsigned. The script elegant, sharp. Brother, he won't say her name. Let him bleed it out another way. I'll make it loud. I'll make it stupid. But it will be enough. He needn't break in front of the others. Cassian traced the edge of the parchment. Salazar wrote that. Bathsheba nodded. Salazar noticed Godric's grief, but knew he wouldn't show it openly. So he dared Godric to outdrink a ghost. And Godric accepted. Played the fool. Got drunk. Passed out. Everyone laughed. And no one noticed he was crying until he slept. Cassian exhaled. Salazar carried him to bed. Let the story spread that he'd lost to a ghost. Because grief needs time. And pride needs cover. She reached out and squeezed his hand. Cassian flicked his wand once more. The illusion returned, but quieter now. The tavern dim. The ghost seated, watching. Greyfinder raising his mug to the ceiling. To the fallen, Cassian whispered. And let the mug vanish into smoke. Chapter 60, A Damn Pen. That evening, Cassian was summoned. Dumbledore hadn't written a time. Just a note, charmed to hover ominously above his teacup. Headmaster's office. This evening. No signature. No smiley face. He sighed, what happened this time? He found them already waiting by the time he arrived, Dumbledore behind the desk, McGonagall in her usual place by the hearth, and Snape standing like someone had tried to rearrange his spine with a stick. No tea in sight. Bad sign. Professor Cassian, Dumbledore said, smiling as always. Thank you for coming. Summoned by 3 professors and no biscuits? You wound me. Snape's lip twitched, almost a snarl. You performed a voice-snaring charm on a student, Snape said. Ah. Cassian tilted his head. So that is what this is about. Dumbledore folded his hands on the desk. It was brought to our attention that Mr. Malfoy couldn't speak, Snape snapped. Nor could several of his classmates. During one of your classes. In front of both houses. Do you consider that appropriate classroom conduct? Cassian dropped into the chair. I find screaming less educational than silence. Especially when the screaming is about bloodlines and personal relationships. McGonagall's eyebrow rose. Snape stepped forward. You are not a disciplinary figure. I wasn't punishing them. I was giving them a chance to shut up and think. Cassian glanced at Dumbledore. And for the record, the spell was temporary. They were perfectly unharmed. In fact, I would say they were in better shape than usual. No hex marks. No singed eyebrows. Malfoy got through a whole class without insulting someone. Well, after his first one, of course. Snape's eyes narrowed. Dumbledore raised a hand. I am less concerned about the spell itself than I am about the context. His eyes slid sideways to McGonagall. Minerva. She adjusted her collar. Several parents have written, she said, voice serious as funeral, that your first-year class included demonstrations that, while unorthodox, appear to contradict basic wizarding educational standards. Cassian's eyebrows made the sort of slow ascent usually reserved for hot air balloons. You mean the pen? That, and your advocacy of Muggle methodology, she said. Your tone was also flagged. He blinked. Tone. Snape snorted sharply through his nose. You encouraged students to reject foundational magical authority. You spoke against Hogwarts' own historical canon. And apparently claimed that Salazar Slytherin once hexed a badger. I said he tried, Cassian corrected. The badger outweed him. Forbidden Section, Shelf 7b, Row 4, Volume 3, Bestiary of Elusive Beasts. Dumbledore didn't smile. That alone told him this wasn't one of those quiet chats about maybe tone it down a notch. No chuckle, no vague we all remember our first term anecdote. McGonagall looked over her glasses. You were hired to teach magical history. Not rewrite it with a Muggle pen and call it innovation. Cassian shrugged. You didn't hire me to recite textbooks. I'm not teaching falsehoods. That depends on your definition of wrong, Snape cut in. Telling first years that Hogwarts, a history is bollocks with footnotes hardly qualifies as academic rigor. Cassian leaned back in the chair. I said parts of it were edited by people with a nostalgia problem. It is not my fault if students assume everything in hardback is gospel. McGonagall's lips thinned. That is not the main issue, Professor Rosier. Quills are a crucial part of magical education. And the tool. It is a pen, he said, as if that explained everything. Ink goes in. Words come out. Nobody bursts into flames. It is a statement, she said. You use it to provoke. Of course I provoke, Cassian said. It is called teaching. If they are not rattled, they are not learning. Daily quill work is not nostalgia, Professor. It trains pressure, angle, and stroke discipline. Those habits become rune strokes, wart circles, and the grammar of magical scripts. Pens do not teach a hand to carry magic. She huffed. At OWL and NEWT level, a single heavy seraphon can turn a bind into a burst. Examiners can read a student's control in the taper of a stroke. We cultivate that control early, a quill makes you show it. Cassian opened his mouth for another jab, but McGonagall cut him off, voice sharper now. In the field there is no bureau. There is chalk, ash, bone, sometimes blood. A hand trained on quill does not tremble when a ward demands a hair's breadth. That is why we use them daily. Cassian raised both hands, palms out, voice softer. Fair point. And I wasn't saying they should all throw their quills away and flood flourish and blots with pen orders. I was asking why. Why they write with something harder, messy, slower, if they don't know the reason. It was an exercise, not a manifesto. A way to make them stop doing things because they are told to, and start asking what purpose it serves. Break the mold a little. That was all. Dumbledore hadn't spoken in a while. Not unusual. He was watching. That particular kind of quiet that didn't feel passive, like he was folding Cassian into a riddle. You think it appropriate, McGonagall pressed, to undermine magical norms to this degree? No, Cassian said, I think it is necessary. Snape scoffed. Necessary to lecture children on the failures of magical society? To claim that Muggles are more advanced in certain areas? What, exactly, is the goal of your class? Cassian glared at Snape. If I remember right, Severus, you were a half-blood, weren't you? You should know exactly where Muggles outpace us. Snape's shoulders stiffened. Are you insulting me? Cassian blinked, then tilted his head like he'd just been asked if water was dry. What the hell are you talking about? Since when is having a Muggle parent an insult? Snape's glare sharpened. Even McGonagall froze, mouth half open. Cassian gestured vaguely toward the office walls. Look, if your entire sense of worth relies on which half of your blood can do laundry easier, then I really don't know what to tell you. Dumbledore's fingers drummed once against his desk. Enough. Cassian didn't flinch. He sat back, still watching Snape. You asked the goal of my class, Cassian said, finally dragging his eyes back to Dumbledore. It is to teach history. All of it. Not just the bits the Ministry stamped and bound into overpriced textbooks. Not just the pompous monologues written by people trying to scrape their name into a tapestry. Snape's voice cut in, sharper than before. That doesn't explain the ideology you insist upon. Cassian glanced down at his coat pocket. It is a damn pen. It is a symbol, Snape shot back. Well spotted, he said. So are wands. So are house colors. So is every statue in this castle. I am just the first one who decided maybe, just maybe, our tools could be practical instead of performative. Snape moved to the edge of the desk. You encourage disrespect. Undermining magical authority. You speak like someone who holds no reverence for our traditions. Cassian raised a brow. No, I hold no reverence for bad traditions. Snape's lip curled. I'm not recruiting. I'm educating. Cassian went on. But if you want them to understand magic, really understand it, they need to see where it fits in the wider world. Not just in this bubble of enchanted corridors and Latin phrases. You mean the Muggle world, Snape said with a laugh. I mean reality. Cassian leaned forward. Your students aren't going to live in a bubble forever. You want them to know how to handle a cursed goblet, great. But what happens when they are 30 and can't read a bank form because no one taught them how to operate a pen? McGonagall's eyes narrowed. You are a history professor, not a Muggle studies liaison. Cassian tapped the armrest. History is not made in isolation. Every war, every movement, every spell written into the annals of great wizarding achievements. All of it exists in the same world as Muggle revolutions, plagues, literature, and tea kettles. Are you suggesting we let Muggle culture into our curriculum? Snape asked, scorn curling behind every word. I am suggesting, Cassian said, that it is already here. You are just pretending not to see it. Snape smirked. You are a fool. You have no idea what you are talking about. Cassian chuckled. Really? You think Muggle science has nothing to do with our magic? Send an owl to Nicholas Flamel, ask if alchemy is somehow not chemistry wearing a fancier robe. Go ask Madame Hooch if she doesn't factor in gravity every time she tosses a quaffle. Or better yet, Severus, ask yourself, when you boil water for your potions, don't you measure it? Or do you still go by a splash and 3 pinches in a prayer? Snape's mouth opened, but Cassian wasn't finished. Oh, I forgot, he went on, pacing now, hands in his coat pockets. You are so bleeding traditional, you probably still measure by cups instead of units. Next you will be telling me the moon is made of spell dust and unicorn farts. McGonagall crossed her arms. No one is saying Muggles don't offer insight. Actually, Cassian said, jerking a thumb at Snape, he very nearly did. Snape sneered. Muggles cannot perform magic. No, they can't, Cassian said. But they can build flying machines that cross oceans. They can split atoms, Severus. Do you even know what that means? Dumbledore's gaze drifted from Cassian to the fireplace, unreadable as ever. Cassian moved again. Meanwhile, half our magical defenses are make it hiss and glow ominously. No backup plans. No understanding of what makes the magic work, just incantations barked out like recipes in a dying language. You speak of recklessness, Snape snapped. You parade half-truths before children. I teach them to question things, Cassian said. Big difference. Dumbledore finally decided to join the conversation. And yet, many of your students are now citing Muggle advancements as superior to wizarding traditions. That's not on me, Cassian said, turning. That is on the people who keep telling them wizardkind is flawless and ancient and eternally wise. They come into class thinking witches popped out of the earth fully formed, robes already pressed. All I do is show them the cracks. McGonagall's voice was flat. What cracks? Oh, you know, Cassian said, raising fingers. Blood supremacy. War crimes. Keeping elves in pillowcases. The casual child endangerment system we call education. The fact that the most brilliant minds of our world decided an exploding spell was less dangerous than a comprehensive sex ed class. Snape let out a growl. You mock everything. No, Severus, Cassian said. I mock stupid things. But I can see why you are confused. Dumbledore tapped his desk again. We are not here to debate the ethics of magical education. Cassian raised an eyebrow. Aren't we? McGonagall pinched the bridge of her nose. Cassian, your methods are too unconventional. That is the point, he said. Convention gave us Grindelwald. Convention gave us a society that won't let a Muggleborn sit on the Wisengamot. Convention put students in a house system based on personality traits and then acted shocked when they started stabbing each other over dinner. Snape's eyes darkened. And your solution is what, exactly? Throw out everything and let them play with Muggle toys. No, Cassian said, stepping forward again. My solution is to make them think. Not parrot. Not kneel. Think. Let them see the full picture. The good, the bad, the bits covered in ministry stamps and the parts they shoved in the attic. Dumbledore sighed, leaning back, meaning the verdict was given. You are aware that several parents have written in. Cassian didn't flinch. Of course they have. One mentioned, Dumbledore continued, that your lectures may encourage a radical deconstruction of magical heritage. Cassian shrugged. Good. Someone ought to. He reached into his coat and pulled out 2 pens, plain, cheap plastic ones. Placed them gently across the desk. One landed neatly in front of McGonagall. The other hit a paperweight and spun to a halt near Dumbledore's teacup. Do you know what these are? I mean really no? Not just a Muggle writing thing. How they were built. How they were designed. He exhaled some of the heat from his chest. Despite looking like a joke next to a wand, those things are tiny marvels of engineering. You ever try making something that small not leak, clog, or explode under pressure? It is a miracle, honestly. McGonagall didn't touch the pen. Dumbledore gave it a cursory glance, then folded his hands again. They are designed for mass production, Cassian went on. No magic. No core. Just ink, pressure, gravity, and clever problem solving. Do you have any idea how many people had to screw up for those to exist? Snape muttered, this is hardly relevant. Cassian didn't even blink. It is the most relevant thing in the room. He nodded at the pens. You want to talk about heritage? There is a story behind those. Every part of them. They can write upside down. Slanted. In water. In bloody space. Cassian laughed. A quill will slit your fingers open if you so much as breathe wrong. I taught them that. Told them straight, if the thing you are scribbling doesn't need magical conductivity, a quill is the worst option. Worse than a bloody stick and hope. I showed them the difference. That is it. How is that wrong? Dumbledore raised a hand before the other two could say anything. Professor Rosier, we ask you to be mindful. You are employed here not just to teach, but to represent Hogwarts. What you say in that classroom shapes how our students understand the world. And gods forbid they understand it correctly, Cassian said. Wouldn't want them wandering around thinking for themselves. McGonagall took off her glasses, cleaned them. A move that usually meant she was fighting the urge to hex someone and didn't want smudges in her line of sight. You are here as part of a faculty, not a revolution. I noticed. It is very unified, Cassian said, waving a hand. So far today I've been accused of radicalizing children with office supplies and questioning the orthodoxy of a badger fight. Snape stiffened. You are not taking this seriously. I am taking the students seriously. Which, judging by this meeting, might be the actual problem. Dumbledore's voice came quieter this time. That may be precisely it, Cassian. You care. I do not question that. But you have a tendency to treat your classroom like a stage. Cassian blinked, then gave the kind of grin that looked more like a warning label. You want me to be boring. I want you to be careful. Dumbledore sat back. We are not asking for silence. But perhaps a touch of restraint. You may challenge. But don't mock. He tucked the chair back. I will rein it in. No pens near the altar. I will try not to provoke any sacred cows unless they move first. Snape muttered something under his breath. As he turned for the door, Dumbledore's voice caught him again. Professor Rosier. He paused. We hired you for a reason. Cassian didn't look back. Yet. One of these days, I'd like to know what it was. Then he left. Imagine explaining this to Merlin. Yes, people read entire epics, and then, nothing. Chapter 61, Daddy. Walking out the headmaster's office, Cassian clenched his fist. He had no illusions. This wasn't about pens. Or tone. Or even that bloody badger comment. He taught the same class last year. Same jabs, same tricks, same teacup stunt. Dumbledore knew it too. Probably read half the assignments over his nightcap and chuckled into his beard. So this was about the audience. New faces. Sharper ears. Bigger names. Not all the first years came in equal. Malfoy's name might as well have been carved on half the bricks, and Cassian didn't need a seating chart to know which students had owls that carried family crests. The complaints hadn't come because he said something wrong. They came because he said it to the wrong people's children. Dumbledore hadn't stopped him, hadn't even frowned. He knew exactly what this was, a show for Lucius, not a trial for Cassian. And the reason he pushed back as hard as he did was simple, this wasn't a fight with Dumbledore or McGonagall. They were just the messengers. He knew it. They knew it. His jabs weren't aimed at them, and they weren't the ones who'd lose sleep over his tone. It was theater, every line performed for the sake of whatever name sat behind the complaints. Everyone played their part, well, except Snape, of course. Snape wasn't acting. Snape was just an arse. He made his way to Bathsheda's room. Candles lit, a half-drunk mug of something steaming on the desk. Cassian spotted her behind a stack of scrolls and immediately threw himself across her lap with all the grace of a flung cloak. "Mommy," he whined, muffling his face in her robes. "They made me sad." She slapped his arm without looking up. "Stop that. Mean," he muttered into the fabric. "You're heavy. I am emotionally fragile. You're a grown man. I'm traumatized. That meeting violates international treaties." She sighed, shoved her scrolls aside and poked his ribs until he sat upright. "What happened?" He flopped back into her armchair, legs kicked out. They staged an intervention. I got told off for revolutionary pen use. After hearing the whole story, she blinked. You serious? Cassian held up a bureau from his pocket like it was Exhibit A. Apparently, this is too modern for the magical world. God forbid the children write legibly. And I might have accused Salazar Slytherin of starting a slap fight with a badger. Her brow twitched. You didn't. Allegedly, and lost. Cass. It was relevant to the discussion. They were reciting textbook nonsense like gospel. Someone had to say it. She leaned back, arms folded. What did Dumbledore say? Didn't hex me. But he is worried I am a stage performer radicalizing the youth. That is, not unfair. He threw a cushion at her head. She caught it, unimpressed. They had the nerve to say I am undermining magical authority, Cassian went on, sitting up to grab a biscuit from her plate. Like that is hard. The system is so fragile a strong breeze could undermine it. You did steal the Malfoyer's voice. Borrowed. Gently. Returned with minimal scarring. And told students Hogwarts, a history was full of lies. I said edited. You are such a pain. Cassian bit the biscuit in half. That is what they said. She nudged his boot with hers. So what, you come running to me for sympathy. I came for your tea. But I will take pity if it's going. She pushed herself up and crossed the room to fetch another mug. You could make this easier on yourself. Don't push so hard. Don't dig your heels in every time someone raises an eyebrow. He slumped back again, stared at the ceiling. That is the problem, isn't it? I like it. The teaching. The mess. The questions. I actually care. And now I got bloody Draco's dad writing letters because I gave a kid a bureau. She handed him the tea. What you gonna do? He scratched at the line of stubble under his jaw. I will deal with Daddy Lucius directly. If they think I am Professor Binns, they are sorely mistaken. He smirked. I am not a ghost. He. Baths Haida squinted at him. Here we go again. He kissed her, quick, soft, and a bit too to annoy her. Catch you later. You don't have to win every skirmish to win the war. They say, right. And with that, he swept out of her office like a man on a mission. Which was bold, considering his mission involved exactly what any self-respecting pureblood did when things went sideways, cry to his own daddy. Once inside, he locked the door, dragged a chair to the fireplace. He pulled out a blank sheet, clicked his bureau, and stared at the paper. Dear Father. I write to assure you that my mission remains unchanged. The work you and grandfather outlined continues, as promised. The students have responded well, some more than expected. Your concerns about influence and precedent are noted and accounted for. You asked for a method that would teach them to distinguish between the magical world and the non-magical one. A contrast. Sharp lines, obvious truths, cold logic. That is precisely what I am delivering. Nothing cements superiority better than comparison. The plan remains simple, show them how Muggle solutions look clever. Highlight the mechanisms. Let them marvel. Then show where it all breaks. Where magic outstrips machine. Where centuries of wizarding tradition still hold the upper hand. Let them taste that thrill, then show them the limitations. It is how you train a palate. Offer sweetness, then salt. I incorporated these demonstrations subtly, pens, non-magical theories, historical reinterpretation. Not as replacements, mind, but as examples. Small interjections. Enough to spake interest. Enough to set the boundaries. The clever ones try to bridge the gap. The others recoil. Either outcome is useful. You wanted them primed to understand what they are not. I am doing exactly that. They think I am provoking. They don't realize I am preparing. The younger students are particularly pliable. That is to be expected. They've not yet settled into ideological grooves. They parrot what they hear, chase whatever earns points. I've been careful to present magical authority not as oppressive, but established. Stable. Safe. In contrast to the Muggle world's unpredictability. Its noise. Its bluntness. That is the word I used, in fact. Blunt. No finesse. No wandcraft. Just wires and buttons and accidents that occasionally result in progress. The first years soaked it up. Potter, especially. Eager to understand, desperate not to fall behind. He parrots less than the others. Observes more. Dangerous, that. But manageable. He is at the stage where approval still matters. If I offer it sparingly, he will lean the right way. But that Malfoy is as arrogant as expected. He believes himself clever, but leans heavily on his surname to fill the gaps. I let him flounder once. Took his voice. It made a point. He will recover. Slytherins always do. But the memory will stick. But father, how am I supposed to carry out your vision? Your and grandfather's vision, if I am being throttled by the same purebloods who wouldn't know a real legacy if it hexed them in the arse? Lucius Malfoy, with his little parade of peacocks and pocketed ministry favors. He wasn't made, he was placed. Dropped into power like a stone into a pond, and now he wants to pretend the ripples were his own doing. This ridiculous summoning, the tone policing, the implied threat of a committee isn't about the pen, or the lesson, or even the snatched voice. It is an insult. Meant to sting. Meant to remind me where I stand. I was raised for this. Sent for this. But they look at me and see an upstart in a borrowed coat, stirring trouble instead of saluting portraits. They forget your name, our name, built half the bones in this castle. So I ask plainly, handle them. Outside these walls, where I cannot. I can fight for the classroom. I can weather their pointed whispers and snide letters and whatever next pathetic little tantrum they send my way. But I cannot wage war with Lucius Malfoy while teaching 11-year-olds how not to blow their fingers off with basic casting. He plays the political game like it is a family heirloom. I will not. Not here. I don't have time to smile for his allies or tiptoe around his spawn. What I need, what I demand is space. And you owe me that. See? Cassian grinned. Let's see whose daddy is stronger, Draco. He. He slid the finished letter into a thin parchment sheath and sealed it. Then called, Tweak. A loud pop cracked the air. Tweak appeared on the rug with a startled blink. You called for Tweak, Master Professor Rosier. Cassian nodded, stretching his legs out in front of the fire. I need to send a letter. My elf will come pick it up. Be a dear and warn the others, will you? I would rather not start a turf war. Tweak gave a quick nod. Right away, Master Professor, and vanished with another pop. Cassian clicked his pen, rolled his eyes, and muttered, Towel. Another crack. A second elf appeared. You summoned Towel, Master Cassian. It squeaked, already reaching for something invisible. Cassian waved him down. Relax, it is not about cleaning. I need you to relay this straight to the Rosier estate. Personal delivery to father. No detours, no eavesdropping, no swapping letters with curious paintings, yet. Towel straightened. Yes, Master Cassian. Straight to the ancestral door. No talking. No sniffing the walls. Towel is invisible and dignified. Good. Go. Towel vanished. Cassian kept teaching. A little shinier round the edges, sure, no bureau endorsements, no snatching voices mid-sentence, no telling first years the founders were glorified roommates who nearly killed each other over dorm decor. But he didn't exactly go soft. He still used pens. Claimed he retired the last one for reasons of national security. He left out the sharper jabs. But the class still got history, raw and twitching, not the sanitized museum version. Somewhere between Draco's father's letter and Snape's passive-aggressive scowling, Cassian figured it was time to stop painting targets on his back with neon paint. At least for now. Though Regulus's chat with Lucius, well, that was something Cassian would have paid galleons to watch. Rosier Patriarch didn't write ahead. Just showed up. He stepped straight through the ministry's front-facing politeness and walked into Malfoy Manor like he owned the damn place. Technically, he did, twice removed, on his mother's side. Cassian didn't get the details. But he could imagine. He liked imagining. Lucius' face when the tall, unbothered shadow of Regulus Rosier crossed his velvet threshold, hands behind his back, voice flat as parchment. Cassian smiled every time it crossed his mind. He could practically hear Lucius choking on his own welcome. Whatever was said, it worked. The letters stopped. No more concerns. No more notes about tone or content not aligned with curriculum. Cassian walked into class the next morning and wrote the word authority on the board in 6 languages, then underlined it, twice. No one said a word. You're quiet, which is fine. But quiet in history usually ends up labeled Lost Civilization. Chapter 62, Interludes Number 1, Regulus vs Lucius, read after ch 58. Lucius Malfoy liked his mornings neat. Curtains parted by elves at the exact angle to let in the winter sun, silver polished until he could see his own disapproval staring back, tea brewed at that precise temperature where it wouldn't burn his tongue but might blister someone less refined. Order. Ritual. Control. So of course Regulus Rosier chose that exact hour to arrive. Not bothering to send an owl or summons. Not even a polite parchment with wax and crest. Regulus walked casually, didn't announce himself, didn't even pretend to hesitate as he passed through halls lined with velvet drapes and ancestral portraits that sneered at intruders. He was not an intruder. On his mother's side, the deed had been signed with ink and blood, twice removed, and Malfoys knew better than to forget debts. Lucius came down the staircase, stiff. Lord Rosier. He greeted with a grate in his voice. Regulus stood at the foot of the stairs, hands folded neatly behind his back, tall and composed. His eyes flicked across the chandelier, the tapestries, the faint scuff on the marble where an elf had been careless. Then back to Lucius with a sneer. I heard you picked up a new hobby. Regulus said, staring. Lucius tilted his head slightly, one hand resting over the silver snake of his cane. You will have to be more specific. Letters, Regulus said, stepping further into the room. Charmed, duplicated, hand-delivered to the board and back again. Clever. Even paid off Goyle and Crabbe, I hear. The old one too, concern and consensus. He looked around the entrance hall like admiring a painting he intended to sell. You've always been fond of orchestration. Lucius didn't deny it, he casually smoothed his sleeve. If someone's curriculum is disruptive, I would consider it a civic duty to raise the alarm. Surely you agree? I agree, Regulus said, that you're far too old to be surprised by your own reflection. Lucius exhaled slowly through his nose. If this is about Cassian. It is. Sharp and direct. Regulus didn't like holding his punches. He was too busy for hesitation. Lucius knew that. Had known since they were boys, standing on opposite ends of drawing rooms, taught by fathers who'd both believed in cultivating over-sentiment. So he didn't flinch. He only raised a pale brow. Cassian, then. What a shame. I had thought we might discuss something of value. Regulus did not take the bait. He waited. Regulus Rosier's silence was rarely empty. It was the pause in chess when a hand hovers over a pawn, a bait. Would you like tea? Lucius asked eventually, gesturing toward the parlor with all the bored charm of a man offering hospitality because it was tradition, not because he cared whether it was accepted. Regulus didn't answer, just stared. You've been misinformed, Lucius said, brushing a speck of lint from his cuff. No letters of mine ever mentioned Cassian, explicitly. That's not what I asked. Lucius's mouth curved faintly. It's not what I answered. Regulus looked down his nose at him. You've made, Regulus said at last, a grave mistake. Lucius turned away slightly. I've made plenty. This one concerns my son. Yes. The prodigal historian. A brief smile. Charmed the children, insulted the staff, and used a muggle pen in open daylight. Remarkable, truly. I do enjoy a good academic scandal. You forget yourself. I remember perfectly. It's your son I forget. Lucius's voice sharpened. Up until recently, I couldn't even recall the boy could hold a wand upright. Then again, Lucius went on, I'm told he's been quite popular with the children. Dumbledore's reports are glowing. Master G's comment reached even me. A curiosity, that. He sneered faintly, you've worked rather hard to lend his tenure an air of legitimacy. G's endorsement. The French press. Your father's hand, no doubt, he always did have a flair for rehabilitating lost causes. He stepped away from the staircase. Almost makes one wonder if the boy's skill is in history or performance. Regulus didn't blink. He was sent to die on that expedition, wasn't he? Lucius mused, tone light. How convenient that he came back fluent in glyph work and cloaked in praise. Quite the resurrection arc. How very, curate. Lucius went on. But I don't blame you. I blame the desperation. The boy had nothing. No reputation. No record. Couldn't even cast a spell without weeping. And now here he is, a professor. A darling of half the staff. Playing games with the curriculum while quoting war crimes over breakfast. I fail to see your point. Lucius turned his head slightly. My point is, the illusion was working. Quietly. Cleverly. And I would have let it stand, if not for the dramatics. Regulus stared dry, almost bored. You've never understood the difference between illusion and leverage. Lucius smiled without teeth. No, I've merely understood how often one becomes the other. He crossed the threshold into the sitting room, not looking to see if Regulus followed. He poured only one glass. 2 would imply negotiation. You've overplayed your hand, Lucius said, sipping slowly. Dumbledore may tolerate insolence, but the board does not. Nor do parents. You saw the numbers. My letter addressed the heart of the problem. Regulus stepped forward. There will be no next one. Lucius's mouth twitched. So that's why you came. A paternal impulse. He laughed softly. And here I thought you'd given up on illusions. Regulus rested a hand on the antique chair. You misunderstand. I did not come to ask. Lucius raised a brow. I came to inform. The chair creaked under his fingers. Lucius looked down at it. You will not mention my son again. Not to the board. Not to your friends. Not in the presence of ministry mouthpieces. You will not send letters. You will not commission whispers. You will not attempt to bend policy through wine and name games. And if I do? Regulus smiled, almost wolfish, then I remind the ministry who sealed the Flinchcombe vote. Who buried the Oak's testimony? Who signed the protection writ for Adric Mulciber and filed it under civic reform? Oh, and who wrote the impervious lie? Lucius clenched the glass, almost breaking it. Old things, Regulus said softly, but not forgotten. And very easy to misplace once they're remembered. Lucius set his glass down. You would dig up your own house's past over him. Regulus studied him like a faded ledger. Rosiers know when to offer blood, he said. And which vein is worth opening? Lucius leaned back slowly, spine straight. You'd risk it all for a boy who couldn't conjure a candle 5 years ago. I'd risk nothing, Regulus said. Because I already did. He lived. Chapter 63, Fly. Things carried on. Cassian did dial it back, not much but still. Just changed the rhythm. Fewer fireworks, more rope. The Gryffindors were catching on quick. Hermione started arguing footnotes with him by next week. Neville still looked like he might spontaneously combust if called on, but he stopped flinching every time someone called his name. Seamus had set a quill on fire twice. Cassian refused to be impressed until it was intentional. And so arrived Cassian's favorite time of the year. Baths Haida and he stood at the edge of the grass like a pair of underwhelmed judges at a sheepdog trial. She smoothed the picnic blanket down with one knee while he rummaged in a box, weighing snacks for an afternoon of mild chaos. Bribed the elves, he said, setting out a slab of treacle tart with the same reverence some people reserved for holy relics. They gave me everything but a roast. Baths Haida unwrapped a sandwich. You promised them a recipe again, didn't you? I promised not to cook one. The field ahead buzzed with the nervous energy of first years about to discover whether gravity had personal vendettas. A row of brooms lay on the grass like forgotten garden tools, and the children stood in a loose clump near them, whispering and shooting wary glances skyward. One of the Hufflepuff girls, Abbott if he was correct, looked at the Brahms with nose wrinkled. Cassian popped a cherry into his mouth. Nothing like watching 11-year-olds try not to cry while pretending they got what it takes to die for sport. You sure you can judge them? She asked, glancing sideways, still baffled he couldn't fly. He pointed his fork at the field. I am observing to learn how to fly. Let me pace myself. Madame Hooch stormed into view like a gale in boots. Yellow eyes, cropped grey hair, whistle around her neck, and the general air of someone who found most things inadequate. Well, what are you all waiting for? She barked. Broomsticks. Stand next to one. Not behind it, not sitting on it. Next to it. Honestly. The first years shuffled into place, brooms at their feet. Harry Potter looked down at his like it might explode. Cassian eyed him, chewing thoughtfully. The boy didn't look scared. Just, waiting for it to do something. The broom was half dead, twigs poking out like it had been used to clean chimneys. "Stick out your right hand," Hooch called, pacing in front of them like a general, "and say, 'Up! Up!'" They chorused. Most of the brooms twitched. One flew straight into a face. Another flopped over. Harry's jumped neatly into his hand. "Of course it did. Show off," Cassian muttered. "Probably had the best training." Hermione's broom wobbled, then flopped over as if insulted. Neville's just lay there like a corpse. His voice trembled as he said up again, quieter this time, and the broom still didn't budge. He gave Madame Hooch a quick, panicked glance, then looked away. "They are not cats," Cassian called. "Stop trying to coax it like it is going to purr." Bath's Haida elbowed him. "Let her teach." "I am letting her. I am just offering emotional support." Hooch was now demonstrating how not to concuss yourself while mounting. She moved down the row, correcting grips and swatting fingers like it was a fencing class. She stopped in front of Malfoy. "You," she said, squinting. "You've been holding it like that all this time? That is wrong." Cassian snorted tea through his nose. The prat was prattling on about how he could race a dragon in his backyard and how he nearly crashed into a muggle heli just seconds ago. "Now." Hooch raised her whistle. "When I blow this, kick off. Straight up, hover, and come back down. Do not show off. Do not drift. Do not die. 3, 2. Neville, in a fit of either courage or misread timing, launched skyward before the whistle touched her lips. Cassian sat up straight. Neville went up like someone had lit a fire under him, 12 feet, 20, 30, arms flapping, eyes white as dinner plates. "Come back, boy!" Hooch bellowed. Cassian winced. "Oh, no." Neville teetered sideways. "Don't you?" Cassian's wand was in his hand before the words were fully formed. "Wingardium, no, wait." His eyes narrowed. "Gravitas Ascendio." The old variant cracked through the air like a whip, and Neville shot straight up, arms flailing, eyes round with terror, then froze, suspended mid-air like a mildly traumatized balloon. The entire class gasped. Madame Hooch's head snapped toward Cassian. "Can you bring him down?" Cassian scratched his temple with the tip of his wand. "Right, of course. Bath's Haida. Spungify, if you would be so kind? I would rather not splatter the child in front of witnesses." Bath's Haida sighed so strong, it moved the grass. "You are unbelievable," she muttered, casting the softening charm with a flick and a roll of her eyes. Cassian grinned, let the levitation drop. Neville plummeted like a sack of potatoes, hit the cushion with a loud boing, bounced once, and landed in the grass. Soft, a bit stunned, limbs everywhere but otherwise intact. Madame Hooch was already kneeling beside him. "You are fine, boy. Bruised pride, maybe a bone or two. Let's get you to Madame Pomfrey." She shot Cassian a look of gratitude, but it felt like being thanked by an eagle, scary. "Watch the class, please." Cassian gave a half bow. "Delighted." She turned to the rest. "None of you is to move while I take this boy to the hospital wing. You leave those brooms where they are or you will be out of Hogwarts before you can say Quidditch. Come on, dear." Neville, looking like he wasn't quite sure if he dreamt the last 5 minutes, hobbled along beside her, one hand cradling his wrist. The second she was out of earshot, Malfoy barked out a laugh. "Did you see his face? The great lump." The other Slytherins snorted and tittered like it was the best joke they heard all week. "Ooh, sticking up for Longbottom," Pansy said, when Parvati turned on Malfoy. "Never thought you would like fat little crybabies, Paddle." Malfoy darted forward, snatched something glinting out of the grass. "Oh, look," he said, holding it aloft. "That stupid toy his gran sent him." The remembrall glittered in his palm. "Give that here, Malfoy," Harry said. The chatter cut off like someone had pressed mute. All eyes swung between them. Malfoy smiled slowly. "I think I will leave it somewhere for Longbottom to collect. How about, up a tree?" Before Cassian could so much as twitch, Malfoy was on his broom and kicking off the ground. Up he shot, nimble, smug, holding the remembrall high like a trophy. "Come and get it, Potter." Harry grabbed his broom, hands tight around the handle. His face had that look, half rage, half Don T think just do. He looked at Cassian. Professor, can you stop him? Cassian, still chewing on a cherry, shrugged. I don't know how to fly. But I choose you, Potter. Fly. He already had his wand up, a cushioning charm at the tip of his wand. Harry didn't need another word. He kicked off, and the broom took to the air like it had been waiting for him. Hermione gasped, then hissed, Madam Hooch said not to move. He will get expelled. Cassian waved her off. He is already in the air, Granger. Let him finish the thesis before you write the detention notice. He remembered Potter being either a Quidditch star from his past life. Was probably trained by best of the before coming Hogwarts. Or was he a big Quidditch fan? If it was the first, great, he probably knew how to fly. If it was the second, oh boy, he was in some serious trouble. Still, Cassian couldn't imagine the James Potter's son not being taught how to fly. And besides, Potter had gotten the broom right on his first try, he probably wasn't a stranger to the skies. Malfoy hovered higher, still holding Neville's remembrall, grin tightening. The moment Harry reached him, the grin faltered. They circled. Harry just angled his broom forward, close enough that Malfoy had to backpedal in the air. Give it, Harry said. Malfoy tried to smirk. It came out twitchy. Or what? You will cry. Harry tilted his broom forward, jerked it into a sudden lunge. Malfoy swore and jolted back, just missing a tree branch. Mental, you are. Cassian moved to the edge of the field, hands in his pockets, squinting up. Oops. They get heated. Bath's Haida passed him a pumpkin pasty. Don't encourage it. I am not. I am observing. Above, Malfoy scowled, clearly regretting everything that led to this point. Fine. Catch it if you can, then. He hurled the remembrall skyward like a shooting ball and yanked his broom into a dive back to the ground. Harry didn't hesitate. He locked eyes on the ball, small, spinning, dropping fast, and followed it as if it were worth more than his future. Oh, Cassian muttered, raising his wand. This is getting dangerous. Harry tucked himself close to the broom, shooting down. The wind tore past him, whipping his hair and tugging his sleeves like it wanted him gone. Cassian tracked him with his wand, arresto momentum read to be fired if the pull-up went wrong, he'd catch the fall before bone met turf caught a flicker of movement on the ground. He saw Hannah Abbott covering her eyes, Ron yelling something lost to the wind, Lavender simply shrieked. Harry reached. Fingers out. One shot, one opportunity. The remembrall slapped into his palm. He yanked the broom up hard and the whole thing bucked, launching him in an awkward arc that ended with him thudding onto the grass, fingers curled around the remembrall like it was a prize. Seamus whooped. Ron shouted. Parvati screamed again, this time in delight. Cassian strolled over, whistling. You all right, Potter? Harry blinked up at him from the ground. Yeah. Good. Thought we would have to start burying first years by week 2. He glanced up at the sky. 10 out of 10 for showmanship. 2 for reform. You land like a sofa. Harry pushed himself up, still clutching the remembrall. The broom lay a few feet off, twitching. Malfoy. Cassian called lazily, scanning the field. Where did he? Ah. There he goes. Off to cry into Daddy's robes. Malfoy was already storming off, Crabbe and Goyle trailing behind. Think he will tattle? Ron asked, jogging up beside Harry. Cassian chuckled, mouth still half full of pastry. Oh, he will. He stood, brushing crumbs off his coat, then cupped a hand around his mouth. Draco Malfoy. Come back here. Authority, as he once said, came in many languages. Cassian preferred the language of timing. Don't worry, I'm not offended. Entire empires collapsed from neglect. But I shall stand. Chapter 64, Punishment. Hello. First things first, Cassian is not making up history. Everything he teaches comes from books, most often from the forbidden section and not from his imagination. The Badger incident and other stories are all learned from the books. But as Cassian reminds his students again and again, just because it's written doesn't mean it's correct. That's the lesson. His doubtful, challenging attitude is intentional. He shows them how to approach history critically, not as a tidy string of facts to parrot. So yes, the stories are real, the sources are real, but the skepticism is what Cassian is trying to instill. Because a lot of these classroom lessons deserve more room than the main chapters can give, I'll be writing them as side chapters, some exclusives. They'll expand on the sources Cassian cites, the obscure records, and the inconvenient facts Hogwarts would rather ignore. Other big events, like Regulus Rosier's visit to Malfoy Manor, will also appear as side chapters, since they're too rich in politics and character work to cram into a single paragraph. Now, about Draco in Chapter 59, Fly. Why he acted so defiantly, even with 2 professors present. That was intentional. Pureblood families don't respect Bath's Haida, as they see her as a Muggle-born sympathizer, which I've already shown through Cassian and Regulus's clashes. Cassian himself has fought with Regulus and Lucian over that very perception. And remember, at the end of Chapter 58 and the start of Chapter 59, the narration made it clear Cassian took a step back. To the school, to Lucius, to Draco, it looked like Cassian had folded. So from Draco's perspective, standing proud in front of a defeated professor was natural, even expected. I want to make one thing clear, none of this was last minute. These chapters weren't whipped up on the fly star. I had nearly 100 drafts before publishing the first chapter, and Chapter 59 was published on another platform a month earlier, where I had enough feedback before bringing it here. I chose this version because I don't believe it's out of character for anyone involved. Lastly, this wasn't a forced plot. If I wanted it easy, I could have simply left Cassian and Bath's Haida out of the scene entirely and let things unfold the same way. Instead, I wrote it this way because it fit the dynamics, the characters, and the stakes. So yes, the choices are intentional. The arcs are planned. And the side stories are coming. P.S. Some of you raised concerns about the sudden way Cassian awards or deducts house points. That's intentional too. It will make sense at the end of this year, and ties back to why he started doing it in his second year. I don't want to spoil my own FIC, but please know this isn't sloppy consistency, it's part of the plot and part of Cassian's character. PS2. On the flying scenes, the reason Cassian used Gravitas Ascendio for Neville instead of Arresto Momentum is simple. His Arresto Momentum isn't on the same level as his Leviosa variants, which he's mastered completely. When Neville floated up and then suddenly dropped, Cassian's instincts went to the spell he knew better. You'll notice he first attempted Leviosa, then shifted to Ascendio. Harry's case was different. The chase lasted longer, giving Cassian time to prepare both a cushioning charm in case Harry fell, and Arresto Momentum if he shot toward the wall. The situations weren't the same either. Neville was drifting straight up, while Harry was barreling at stone. Ascendio wouldn't have helped Harry, it might even have made the impact worse. Thank you. Cassian stood, brushing crumbs off his coat, then cupped a hand around his mouth. Draco Malfoy. Come back here. Malfoy froze mid-step, back rigid. He turned like someone had cast Petrificus Totalis. This isn't your class, he called, aiming for Smug, cracking halfway through. Cassian gave him a nod. Right. Except Madame Hooch left me in charge. Which makes me your favorite professor for the next, 20 minutes. He motioned him over. I said come here. The boy hesitated, weighing defiance against consequences, then stalked back, sneering as if to dare Cassian run his mouth again. Cassian pointed to the space in front of him. Closer. I don't want to shout. You are not worth the effort. Malfoy trudged forward, jaw clenched. Cassian stepped around him, hands behind his back. Explain why you stole a classmate's keepsake, threatened to stash it where he couldn't reach it, dared another to chase you mid-air, then decided to throw said keepsake from a height that could have killed him. He leaned forward. Be careful, Draco. Your answers might put Daddy in trouble. That did it. Draco's face went taut, eyes flashing. Draco didn't meet his eyes. It was just a joke, Professor. A joke, Cassian repeated, slow, as if tasting it. Right. I missed the punchline. Was it when Longbottom fell, or when Potter nearly brained himself? I didn't mean for him to fall, Draco said quickly. Cassian tilted his head. No? So throwing something while suspended in midair with no guarantee he could catch it or survive the fall, that was what? A bonding exercise. Malfoy breathed hard from his nose. I didn't think he'd actually go after it. Cassian's smile thinned. So you were trying to destroy the Longbottom heir's heirloom? Draco's shoulders twitched, mouth working. I didn't mean to. Didn't mean to what? Hurl it with enough force to dent a roof tile. Cassian took a step closer. That is odd. Because it looked a lot like you wanted it broken, or lost, or picked up in pieces with Longbottom crying over it. Draco's mouth snapped shut. It was a. You said it already, Cassian stared at him. But let me entertain it. A classic Slytherin joke. Theft, mid-air endangerment, and emotional sabotage. Hilarious. He glanced over his shoulder at Harry and back again. Must have them rolling in the common room. Draco didn't reply. Cassian chuckled. Well, that is 30 points from Slytherin. And 1 week detention. Malfoy snapped his head around. You can't do that. My father will hear about it. Cassian smiled wider. 2 weeks. Dare me more. A voice cut through the field. What is going on in here? McGonagall's cloak flared behind her as she marched across the grass. Her eyes bounced from Malfoy to Harry to the scattered class and then fixed, of course, on Cassian. Professor Rosier, McGonagall said, in the tone people reserved for murderers and late paperwork. No. Professor babbling, please. I am not in the mood to decode Professor Rosier. Cassian pulled out a cookie from his pocket. He waved it like it was legal tender. Oh, don't let me interrupt. This is thrilling. Shall I narrate? Bath's Haida looked far too calm for someone caught in a Malfoy-initiated chaos storm. Longbottom went up too early. Cassian caught him. No bones broken. Then went on, explaining the rest of the story. Cassian gestured grandly to the sky. He flew. Briefly. Like a very round, very confused pigeon. McGonagall turned to Harry, who was still holding the Remembrall tight. Mr. Potter. Did you chase Mr. Malfoy into the air? Harry opened his mouth, probably to lie, but Cassian cut in. He absolutely did, he said. And it was brilliant. Professor Rosier, she snapped. What? I am not rewarding it. I am just acknowledging that if the boy doesn't end up on a broom professionally, we've all wasted a prodigy. Actually, I am rewarding him. 10 points to Gryffindor. Harry turned faintly pink. Malfoy, meanwhile, tried to speak, but McGonagall held up a hand. Not now. Cassian took another bite of the cookie. For what it is worth, I did issue a punishment. 2 weeks detention. And 30 points from Slytherin. McGonagall blinked. You what? Cassian tilted his head. Did I stutter? She gave a small breath through her nose. You are not authorized to assign detentions to students not in your class. I was in charge, he said. Temporarily. That makes me acting authority. McGonagall squinted, probably deciding whether to go with it or argue. Fine. Mr. Potter, come with me. Hermione made a sound like she was winding up for a defense, but Cassian waved her off before she could load the speech. He is not in trouble. He looked at Harry, then back at McGonagall. I may not look like it, but I am still a professor. I told him to fly. If anything happens, it will be on me. Bath's Haida took a bite of tart, unbothered. So you do admit you don't dress like a professor? Cassian pouted. I meant I am young and charming. You are neither, she said, flat as stone, just skippable. Harry trailed after McGonagall. The rest of the class stood frozen, half expecting a lightning strike or sudden suspension. Cassian turned to them and clapped twice. Show is over. Lavender raised a hand. Professor, do we still fly? Cassian rolled his eyes. Mocking me, are you, Miss Brown? Told you, don't know how to fly. Let's all lie down and stare at the sky. Pretend we got talent. A few of them laughed, half relieved, half still waiting to see if another broom might take off on its own and chew someone's leg off. The broom stayed grounded. The students didn't. Lavender dropped with the kind of theatrical sigh that begged attention, Seamus followed like he meant to nap, and Hermione sat so stiffly it looked like the grass might contaminate her trousers. Cassian flopped back with a grunt. The sky stretched wide above them, clouds drifting lazy and fat across a blue too bright to be trusted. A lone hawk wheeled overhead. Imagine you are flying, he said. Real flying. Wind in your eyes, teeth frozen, every part of you clenched because the broom is wobbling and someone's mum is already writing your eulogy. Sounds awful, Parvati muttered. Exactly, he said. Dumbledore's office looked unusually sharp that night, like it caught wind of the argument before it started. McGonagall stood near the hearth again, arms crossed, lips thinner than usual. Snape was pacing. Cassian barely stepped inside before it began. Snape didn't even wait for him to sit. "You are shielding him," he snapped at McGonagall. Potter broke a direct order. Cassian shut the door with his boot and made a vague waving motion. "Evening. I am fine, by the way. Thanks for asking." Snape ignored him. "Rules apply to everyone. Or is that only true when it is not Gryffindor?" McGonagall sighed. "First one. Severus. No. No, you don't get to dismiss it." He turned on her. He disobeyed an explicit instruction. Left the ground. Stole a broom. Chased a thief, Cassian cut in, wandering to a chair. Bit of context never hurt anyone. Snape's eyes flashed. "You encouraged him?" I observed. "Like a responsible adult with no aerial expertise and a treacle-tart hangover." McGonagall sighed again. 2. She rubbed the bridge of her nose. Dumbledore hadn't spoken yet. He sat behind the desk, fingers folded, gaze neutral. Snape turned to him now. He should be punished. He went flying and endangered himself and another student. Cassian cocked a brow. "If we are playing that game, then surely we are also punishing the kid who lobbed a keepsake." Snape whirled to him. "You had no right to issue detention. It wasn't your class." Cassian leaned back. "Frankly, I had the patience of a saint, considering the brat nearly turned the pitch into a drop test." "That does not." McGonagall cut in. "Professor Rosier acted in the capacity he was assigned. Madame Hooch left him responsible for the class. That grants him disciplinary rights." Snape turned sharply. "That doesn't extend." "I didn't send the boy to Azkaban," Cassian said, legs crossed, arms lazily draped over the armrest. "I gave him 2 weeks of wiping cauldron scum. Might build some character." "It is not your place to assign punishments to students who aren't under your purview," Snape snapped. "Oh, I see. So if a student lights another on fire during herbology, the professor's job is to take notes and politely wait for the child's head of house to show up." Cassian's brow lifted. "That is mental." Dumbledore shifted. He looked over his hands. "It is not about your authority in that moment. It is about precedent." "Ah," Cassian said, drawing out the word. "The real villain of the hour." "Professor Rosier," McGonagall warned, though it was more out of habit than heat. "No, go on," Cassian said. "Let's set a precedent. That if someone breaks rules mid-flight, we will wait and draft a committee response. Or better yet, let them off because it is a weekday and the paperwork is a pain." Snape turned on his heel. "You show no regard for structure." "Structure," Cassian repeated, tapping his chin. "Interesting. Because what I saw was a boy commit theft, incite a chase, and nearly kill another kid over a prank." "You are exaggerating." "I am quoting." Cassian cut him off, pushing himself to his feet. "Malfoy launched that remembrall with all the grace of a trebuchet. Potter caught it in freefall. If he missed, we would be discussing his hospital wing stay. Or funeral options." McGonagall's eyes flicked between them. Snape looked ready to throttle someone. "I understand the stakes," Snape hissed. "But you escalated it." "No, I finished it." Cassian didn't move. "Would you have preferred I let Malfoy prance off with a pat on the head? There, try not to endanger classmates tomorrow? Or wait for you to show up with a scroll and a frown?" Snape stepped closer. "You think everything is a stage for your commentary?" Cassian smiled. "Only the interesting bits. That boy is not your toy, Rosier. No, he is your problem. And I am happy to leave him in your capable hands next time. I will even write you a note. Dear Severus, Malfoy's tried to commit light manslaughter. Yours sincerely, the Muggle pen guy." Dumbledore finally stood. "Enough." He glanced at Snape, then McGonagall. "We will revisit the discipline process. For now, the punishment stands." Snape looked like he'd bitten into something rotten. "He undermines." "He acted in the moment," Dumbledore said, eyes fixed. "Let's not pretend we wouldn't do the same." McGonagall gave a tiny nod. Snape turned back to Cassian, eyes shaper. "This isn't about that boy. It is about you. You walk in here, smirking, smug, acting as if the school's rules are guidelines. Cassian blinked. They are. Snape's jaw worked. You want obedience? Cassian said. Get better rules. McGonagall looked like she was seconds from removing her glasses and tossing them at someone. Professor Rosier, that will do. Cassian waved a hand, tone too casual to be anything but pointed. Fine, fine. So long as he is punished for 2 weeks, let the disciplinary committee sort the rest. I doubt anything will come of it. Hard to find guilt when Daddy's gold funds half the school's plumbing, but good enough. Snape's mouth curled into a smile like he found rot under a fresh apple. I remember another family decommissioning Professor Bins with gold as well. Cassian laughed coldly, and that professor proved himself. Over and over. Even Master G sent letters asking the headmaster if he would let me go. He turned, fixing Dumbledore with a look that was too calm to be harmless. And what was your response, headmaster? Dumbledore leaned back. Eyes met Cassian's. I told him you were not mine to send. You had unfinished work. Cassian clicked his tongue. You said no. I said you were needed here. Cassian gave a nod, like he was filing it under sentimental but admissible. That is the one. Snape huffed off in a swirl of robes. McGonagall swallowed the third sigh, instead turned and followed without a word. Cassian stayed put. Hands in his pockets, coat slightly askew from all the gesturing, he stood before Dumbledore's desk. I decided what to do about the third-floor corridor, he said, flicking a folded bit of parchment from his pocket. My part of the trial, I mean. Check here. I give you fire, light, lost runes, history bleeding into the present, and you give me the energy of a house elf avoiding eye contact. Fair trade, I suppose. Chapter 65, Tribute. Cassian stayed put, standing before Dumbledore's desk. I've decided what to do about the third-floor corridor, he said, flicking a folded bit of parchment from his pocket. My part of the trial, I mean. He dropped a scroll on the table. Right, so. Here is the thing. This is not the greatest ward in the world. Dumbledore blinked over his teacup. No. Cassian leaned forward, eyes a little wild. No. Couldn't remember the greatest ward in the world. He waved a hand. The greatest ward in the world was drawn on a Monday night, under duress, with poor lighting and better company. It had recursive layering, a memory loop, and a spatial fold so tight it made time stutter. But then. He sighed, the rug, oh, the rug had just witnessed things no furniture should. Cassian pointed at the parchment. So I did my best. I lit a candle, stared into the void, and tried to remember. This is what I got. It is close. It is clever. But it is not that plan. That plan is legend now. Possibly absorbed into the fabric of the rug. No, headmaster. This is just a tribute. Dumbledore set his cup down. And this tribute, what does it do? He shrugged. Basic illusion of light. Makes the corridor look longer, darker, and emptier than it really is. Adds a sense of dread, if you are prone to that sort of thing. Also creates a riddle. Dumbledore picked up the scroll and let it roll open. His eyebrows gave a polite twitch. This is perfect, Professor Rosier. This is the level of challenge I was looking for in the first place. Days slipped by, quicker than a ministry budget vote. Malfoy scrubbed cauldrons with a frown etched so deep into his face. 2 weeks of elbow grease and not a single protest past day 3, not after Daddy Rosier had a little chat with Daddy Malfoy and came back looking like someone told him House Rosier might call in a few old debts. Draco turned up quiet after that. Polite. Even wiped down the benches after class once. Cassian almost checked his temperature. Harry made the Quidditch team, of course. First year on the team wasn't exactly subtle. McGonagall dropped the news like it was nothing, and Cassian nearly choked on his tea when he heard. Not because it was Potter. Cassian could already tell the boy flew like he was born with a broom jammed up his spine, but because it meant Snape would sulk harder than usual. And he did. All the way through staff meetings. Cassian stopped offering him biscuits. No point wasting good shortbread. Classes kept rolling. Cassian's lectures slid from ancient blood pacts to magical plagues and how the goblins nearly cursed the entire south wing of Gringotts into a permanent echo chamber. The students started showing up 5 minutes early just to get decent seats. Bath's Haida drifted in and out of his rooms like she was doing it for years. Her boots ended up under his bed, her notes on his table, her sleep schedule entirely wrecked. She still scolded him in staff meetings, occasionally with a quill to the ribs, but she never left without borrowing one of his jumpers on the way out. Cassian didn't mind. He found 3 of them folded in his wardrobe, washed, pressed, and smelling faintly of ink and chamomile. Domestic terror. He liked it. Then came Friday. Cassian was mid-lecture, pacing in front of the second years, halfway through a sentence about how a Welsh necromancer once tried to trademark the color black, when Cho Chang raised her hand. "Professor. Is it true you can bottle someone's voice?" He stopped walking. "Depends," he said, squinting. "Do you mean legally, magically, or romantically?" A few of the Ravenclaws snorted. One Gryffindor scribbled something as if she was worried it might be on a quiz. Cho hesitated. "Magically." Cassian nodded. "Right. Then yes." Katie Bell raised her hand, chewing on the end of her quill. "Isn't it only djinn and fairies who can bottle voices?" Cassian's smile twitched. Not because she was wrong, opposite, really. Because his head still hadn't shaken loose that image. That awful, sticky vision the ancient variation had dropped on him like a bucket of blood. A circle of stone, a mouth stitched shut, and a scream soaked in salt. He nodded. "Technically, yes. But magic is flexible. Slippery. It is not about the who, it is about the how. You want to trap a voice, it depends on your method." Marcus Belby squinted. "Like, actual voices? Talking voices?" "Yes, Marcus. Not metaphorical ones. I am not bottling someone's inner truth and selling it at a poetry reading." Cho's brow furrowed. "But how does that even work?" Cassian chuckled. "It works a bit like silencio, only ruder. Instead of muting them, it cuts the voice out entirely. Neatly. Like a spellcast throat punch." He gave the room a glance, noting who looked intrigued and who looked mildly traumatized. "You can think of it like stupefy. If I knock someone flat with that, they don't get up unless someone helps them, or I let them. This works the same way. Only the caster can lift it. Or someone can find the container where the voice is trapped and break it," Cassian went on, pacing tall to make them nervous. "Drawback is, you need a container. But we are magics, aren't we? We can conjure, summon, transfigure, pinch a jam jar off the breakfast trolley if it comes to that." Marcus raised his hand again, cautious now. "What kind of container?" Cassian paused. "Anything that can hold a spell. A bottle. A shell. Someone once used a hollowed-out galleon. Bit on the nose, but it worked. Voice stayed in there till someone had the bright idea to snap it open." Eddie Carmichael frowned. "So, if someone finds it and breaks it, what? The voice just comes back." Cassian grinned, toothy and unbothered. "In that case? The bloke it belonged to had already snuffed it. Voice didn't have a body to crawl back into, so it latched onto the room. Screamed for years. Mostly about unpaid debts and someone named Lorna." A few students shifted in their seats. Katie leaned forward. "So, wait. If the voice can't go back into the person, it just hangs around." "Sometimes. Depends on the magic. Depends on the container. Depends on the magic who did it and whether they knew what they were doing or just flailed a wand and hoped for the best." He tapped his temple with his wand. "Same as everything else. Intent, structure, effect. Get it wrong, and you are building a banshee out of bad luck and glassware." "Why would anyone do that?" Cho asked. "What is the point of taking someone's voice?" Cassian looked at her. "Control. Revenge. Fear. Bit of a laugh, if you are the sort of person who finds that funny." He started walking again, hands tucked behind his back. "I used it on Mr. Malfoy because he was being a prick. I would rather not use it casually though. So, don't be a prick." He turned halfway, casting a dry look at the lot of them. Belby had gone a little pink. Eddie looked like he was waiting for someone to explain the joke. Marietta stopped breathing entirely. "Right," Cassian said, clapping to pull them out of their stupor. "Moving on. Voice magic, also known as echo binding if you want the pretentious name, has been around longer than half your family trees. Fairies do it, sure. Jinn perfected it. Wizards, though." The room watched with bated breath. "A few in the history of magics can use it. I am one of them." That landed. Those sitting near front, leaned away. Cassian checked the clock in his pocket with a quick glance. That is all, children. Unless someone has a spare voice and a jar handy. Ha, it was funny. Books snapped shut in a staggered chain. Quills were stashed. A few exchanged looks like they weren't entirely sure if what they just heard was legal. Eddie mumbled something about checking the library. Marietta all but bolted. Cho lingered, brow furrowed as if trying to memorize Cassian's exact phrasing for later dissection. Katie paused at the door. Professor, she said, if someone breaks the container, and the voice is still, angry, does it always haunt the place? Cassian leaned on the desk. Depends how long it's been trapped. Some come out screaming. Some forget how to speak. One bloke came back singing the same 3 bars of a sea shanty for 6 years straight. Poor sod that lived there had to be buried with earplugs. Katie paused like she couldn't decide if she was fascinated or scared, and wasn't sure which felt worse. She then thanked and left. Cassian stayed at the desk, fingertips drumming, and then the memory returned. Not like a strike this time. Not like it had when it first arrived. It flooded his head a couple of days before term started, while he was halfway through packing. Back then it had knocked him flat, left him trembling and breathless on the floor. He remembered the heat first. A circle. Sand-colored marble. Carved symbols like bone against bone. A djinn, not bound, not summoned. Its form was all smoke and symmetry, and something in its eyes looked like it had been watching since before maps were invented. Cassian watched from outside the circle, bound like the man before the djinn. He couldn't move. He could feel the ropes around his wrist. The poor sod kneeling in the center bled from the mouth. Just a thread. A thin crimson line dripping down his chin. His voice was already leaking into the air, curling in silver wisps from between his lips. The djinn stood in front of him, tall as death, arms folded, expression unreadable beneath a face that seemed carved from dusk and fire. Cassian wanted to scream. To intervene. To run. But he was rooted to the ground. The djinn reached down and pulled. And the man convulsed. His voice was ripped out, dragged by invisible force, drawn from the throat in a single scream. Cassian watched as it twisted from the man's mouth into the djinn's hand, coalescing into a tiny glass orb. The man collapsed. Silent. Still breathing. But broken. And then the djinn turned. Toward him. Cassian. And it saw him. Not glanced. Not sensed. Saw. Its eyes, gold-ringed and too old to name, met his through the veil of memory, and for the briefest instant, the binding circle shivered. Cassian gasped and blinked. He still shivered remembering it. Even now, seated in an empty classroom, a prickle climbed his spine. Because that wasn't just a memory. That was a gaze. For the first time since he started awakening memories, since the ancient variants began to pop up, someone stared back. Not at the body he was riding like a boat through time. Not at the scene. At him. Cassian Rosier. Lucky I enjoy the sound of my own voice. Chapter 66, Flawed. One of those mornings. The kind where the castle creaked like it hadn't slept either, and Cassian, stretched sideways across the couch with one leg hooked over the armrest, had a pencil balanced on his nose. He'd been at it for 10 seconds. Personal record, 13.5. The knock came like a traitor. The pencil slipped, bonked him on the lip, and vanished under the desk. Damn it, he muttered, sitting up. I was about to break my record. He rubbed his nose and sighed. Come in, then. Hermione entered with the caution of someone stepping into the wrong office, or the right one, but far too early. Arms hugged around a book. Big one. Probably something with footnotes. She hovered at the threshold, unsure if she had clearance. Cassian squinted up at her. Miss Granger, he said, brushing graphite from his shirt. Have I finally earned the honor of an intervention? She hesitated in the doorway. No, I. She hesitated. I had a question. He waved her in. Right. Do sit. Pretend this is a real office. Hermione glanced around. This is a real office. Cassian made a face. I am pretending it is not. She sat down slowly, placing the book on the desk, reverently. Cassian winced. It is a first edition, she said, all serious. A guide to foundational spell structures, 1362 print. Cassian nodded slowly. Ah, yes. The thrilling edition. With the appendix nobody read and the footnotes that lie. Her eyes narrowed. They don't lie. He leaned back in the chair. Miss Granger, I say this with all the love in my cold little heart, books lie all the time. That is ridiculous, said, bristling. Books are written by experts. Exactly. He raised both eyebrows. Experts with bias. With ministry oversight. With publishers breathing down their necks about shelf space and scandal. Some of the most famously accurate magical texts were written by people who never cast half the spells they described. She looked half horrified, half offended. As if he kicked a librarian, blasphemy in Grange Reset. But the information's been verified, cross-referenced. Cassian nodded. By more people who never tried the bloody magic themselves. You know how many wizards quote the standard book of spells, grade 3 as if it's divine law? It was written by a woman who thought cruciatus could be cleansed with lemon water. Hermione blinked. She probably had no idea what cruciatus was. Cassian pointed at her book. And that is a reprint of a textbook originally funded by a bloodline purity lobby. You think they didn't trim out anything that made half-blood innovations look clever? You think every charm that has ever existed got documented because it worked? Most were picked because they were easy to teach, not because they were powerful. Hermione opened her mouth, then closed it again. So, she said slowly, you think we shouldn't trust books? Cassian snorted. I think we shouldn't worship them. Read them, sure. Learn from them. Then test what they say like it was scribbled on the loo wall. He nudged a crumpled parchment aside with his foot. The only real test of magic is magic. Not margin notes. She frowned, eyes flitting over the bookshelves behind him, organized, neat, looked like a small nerd temple. You are a professor, she said. Scandalous, isn't it? He grinned. Don't tell anyone. I got a reputation for blasphemy. Her arms folded. Then how do you teach if you don't trust the texts? I teach what works. And what didn't work. And the bits that almost worked and left scorch marks on my face. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. You are clever, Granger. But clever doesn't mean obedient. And it definitely doesn't mean correct. She looked down at her book. I still think books matter. They do. Cassian shrugged. But they are not gospel. They are suggestions. Compilations. Reflections. The moment you treat one like the absolute truth, you've stopped learning. Hermione didn't argue, but she didn't nod either. Her shoulders stiffened like she wasn't used to hearing that kind of challenge from adults, at least not ones who wore their coats inside and used mugs as paperweights. What is the question? Cassian asked, cutting through the pause. You didn't carry that tome all the way down here just to argue about bibliographic honesty. She blinked like she'd forgotten. Then straightened. Oh. Yes. I was reading about early wand-making rituals, pre-Ollivander, specifically the older Eastern European traditions. And I came across something about voice marks. Cassian's brows lifted. Now that is a word I haven't heard in years. Technically, it was old Cassian who heard, but details. Hermione's hands tightened on the book. They are mentioned briefly, but the text calls them lost practice. Says they were used to bind a wand to a specific user's voice. Not their blood or intent. Just, voice. They weren't lost, Cassian said, sitting back. Just shelved. Too specific. Too risky. Her expression flickered. So they are real. Oh, absolutely. Voice marks were all the rage during the Wand War of 172 BCE. Imagine a wand that only responds to your command. Right pitch, right phrasing, down to the inflection. That is, impressive. That is also a nightmare, Cassian said. Lose your voice, and the wand goes inert. You get hexed in the throat, your wand is a twig. Say the incantation wrong because your nose is broken? Useless. Whisper when you should have shouted. Boom, misfire. Hermione's mouth opened, half-formed protest curling on her tongue. He cut her off. Don't mistake complexity for genius. Some magic is complicated because it is clever. Some is complicated because the bloke who made it was stubborn, paranoid, and high on potion fumes. She frowned. But couldn't it be used for Security. He said. Sure. That is why they tried it. But the failures outnumbered the successes 10 to 1. People choked mid-duel. Got colds. Hit puberty. One poor sod got cursed into hiccuping and his wand lit the drapes every third minute until they smothered him. Hermione winced. Still. Isn't there something valuable in exploring it? There is always value, Cassian said. Doesn't mean it belongs in standard practice. She leaned forward. So, you've seen voice-bound wands? He shrugged. Not really. But I've seen other bits trying to do the same thing. Voice-locked wards, mostly. Useless stuff. A Muggle Walkman could beat it. Hermione squinted, trying to picture it, failing. What? Cassian reached into the drawer, pulled out a battered cassette tape, and gave it a shake like it might still hold residual magic, or Rick Astley. You know what a microphone is, Granger? She frowned. Yes. Brilliant. Then you know you can record someone's voice. Play it back whenever. So if your magical lock listens for your voice to unlock, what happens when someone plays your voice back at it? Her mouth opened slightly, brow creasing. He pointed at her. Exactly. Doesn't take a genius. Just a bit of tech and a button. Voice locks don't know if it's really you or a magical dictaphone. Wards never stood a chance. Hermione's brow furrowed. But Muggle technology doesn't work around magic. Everyone knows that. Electronics fail. Radios short out. You can't even get a calculator to function inside Hogwarts. So how could a Walkman, or a tape recorder, possibly fool a magical ward? It doesn't have to work forever, he said. It just has to work long enough. Hermione hesitated. But few seconds, Granger. That is all it takes. You press play. The device stutters. Whines. Maybe the spell around it starts chewing the battery. Doesn't matter. Because in those few seconds, the voice plays. The ward hears what it thinks is you. And it opens. That is, she looked like her brain was physically sorting the files, flawed. Cassian smiled. I believe the term is crap. But yes. Magical purists got obsessed with the idea of authenticity. They thought if the voice came from the lungs, it would be unique. Soul print, some of them called it. He made air quotes with one hand, already sounding bored. Turns out, magic is not that sentimental. It hears the sound, checks the parameters, moves on. You can fool it. Hermione sat back slightly, arms tightening around her book. That's ridiculous. If voice magic can be bypassed that easily, then it shouldn't be used for anything important, he said, tossing the tape back into the drawer. It clacked against a tin of old sugar quills. They tried layering it, voice plus wand core signature, plus emotional state, plus blood resonance. Still beatable. Still a nightmare to calibrate. If you are even a bit off, sniffly, tired, angry, the spell says not you and locks you out of your own bloody vault. Vaults used them for about a decade in Bavaria. Then someone used a phonograph and half the noble houses started suing each other. It was chaos. Lovely to read about. Terrible to live through, I imagine. Hermione looked down at her book, feeling betrayed by ink and paper. But the logic behind it makes sense. Cassian tilted his head. So does communism. Do you know why it doesn't work? She blinked. No. He sighed. Are you familiar with the term pejoration, Miss Granger? Another shake of the head. It's sometimes called semantic deterioration or degradation. He sat back, boot tapping against the desk leg. Right. It is what happens when a word starts off perfectly respectable, then somewhere along the line, people start using it like it got a rash. Hermione stared at him, unsure whether he was about to insult her or start a sociology lecture. Take spinster. Used to mean someone who spun thread. That is it. Perfectly honest job. Then somewhere around the time everyone decided women should marry or combust, it turned into an insult. He gestured vaguely. Or hysterical, came from the idea that women's wombs made them mad. Very charming bit of etymology, that. She looked mildly horrified. And then there is communism, he went on, picking up a bit of parchment and folding it. Beautiful idea. Share your biscuits, don't hoard the milk. Then it turns into a power grab buried in bureaucracy with a side of gulag. He folded again, forming until the paper shaped a sickle. Now it is a dirty word. Even when you just want to share biscuits. Hermione frowned. But what does that have to do with voice marks? He pointed the paper sickle at her. Same principle. Idea wasn't bad. The execution turned it into a cautionary tale. Wands that only listen to your voice? Sounds clever. All it took was one clever bastard with a mirror charm and a stolen syllable, and half the continent panicked. Next thing you know, people started calling it cursed. Too risky. Too unstable. Boom, pejoration. The idea went from innovation to punchline. She opened her mouth. Reconsidered, scratched, and finally glanced down at the book. I just thought, maybe it was forgotten. Cassian gave a short laugh. Magic rarely forgets. Ollivander probably has a dozen of them stuffed in a shoebox somewhere, humming in soprano. I've heard of fingerprint wands, too. Equally stupid. Thought they could key spells to the ridges of your thumb. As if holding your wand wrong mid-duel wasn't dangerous enough, now imagine it doesn't work unless you press the bloody thing correctly. Hermione stared, utterly astonished. Don't let novelty fool you, Miss Granger, he went on. You treat every bit of magic the same way. Ask one question. Is this useful to me? If yes, keep it. If not, bin it. No points for sentiment. Ah yes, the famed reader contribution. Staring politely. Appreciate the effort. Neither Cassian nor I endorse communism. The reference was used purely as an example in context. In fact, again much like Cassian, I believe every ruling system is inherently flawed, because humans are flawed. That's the point behind the title. Chapter 67, Troll. That was the first of many knocks. Granger kept showing up like she was trying to personally unwrite every sentence Cassian D ever muttered about books being full of lies. He didn't mind. It was like being pestered by an overachieving moth, bright, relentless, prone to catching fire if she got too close to something ancient. He would correct her footnotes with a biscuit in one hand and tease her margins with questions that made her frown so hard he swore it left creases in the page. She thought she was studying history. Really, she was studying him. Each visit came with a challenge tucked under her arm and an eyebrow arched. Cassian was used to it. He kept a running tally of how many times she tried to prove him wrong. So far, he was winning by smugness alone. She got smarter about it, though. Switched tactics. Sometimes she would act like she just happened to be passing. Other times she would walk in mid-sentence, waving an annotated scroll like it held divine truth. He gave her tea. Mostly to see how long it took before she forgot about the book and started arguing for fun. And then came Halloween. Too many candles. Too few serviettes. Pumpkin-themed everything. Floating jack-o'-lanterns hovered so low that someone's hat could catch fire, and the ceiling had done its usual trick of matching the sky, this time a stormy swirl of clouds and moonlight with occasional thunder just for drama. Rows of tables groaned under a mess of sweets, roasts, and questionable orange-colored dishes. Cassian shook his head, watching students shovel sweets into their faces like famine was due next week. He could appreciate the effort. What he couldn't get used to was the symbolism. In the British magical world, Halloween also marked Voldemort's fall. Big cheer. End of war. A celebration pinned to one of the bloodiest nights in magical history. Back in his world, it was plastic skeletons, discount cobwebs, and pensioners in vampire capes handing out Haribo with mild suspicion. Here, the ghosts were real and sometimes they even tried to drink your juice. Cassian reached for the tankard at his elbow, sniffed it suspiciously, then sipped. Butterbeer. He scanned the hall, eyes drifting past pointy hats, drooping spiderwebs, and one particularly miserable-looking flan. The Weasley twins were plotting something in plain sight. Excellent form. Angelina was mid-glare. Also excellent. Bath's Haida sat next to him, already halfway through her second helping of roast potatoes and ignoring him as such that required effort. Do you think anyone noticed the cursed pumpkin? He asked, not looking at her. Bath's Haida didn't glance up. Which one? The one over her Snape's head. Her head whipped round so fast Cassian nearly flinched. She zeroed in on the pumpkin floating over Snape's head, squinted then gave a quiet snort that turned into an actual giggle. Not the polite kind either, sudden and a bit evil. She was clearly imagining how it would go if the thing exploded mid-sentence. Cassian figured the mental image probably included gravy stains and a strong disciplinary review. He chewed on a roasted parsnip and muttered, 3 galleons says it is laced with shriek root. Goes off when he frowns. She wiped her fingers on a napkin. So it will detonate in the next 2 minutes. More like 30 seconds, he said, glancing at the tension building in Snape's jaw across the staff table. Look at that clench. He is ready to bite the stem off. Bath's Haida rolled her eyes, but Cassian could see the anticipation burning behind them. Snape, blissfully unaware, sat glaring at his pumpkin pasty. He hadn't noticed the pumpkin yet. Which was a shame, really. Cassian liked to watch the exact moment a man realized his doom hovered overhead in a seasonally festive container. Dumbledore, naturally, looked delighted. Probably knew. Probably enchanted it himself. The man had that exact twinkle tonight, the sort that meant trouble had been allowed, possibly encouraged, but only if it resulted in life lessons and mild chaos. A low huff beside them signaled McGonagall. She sat stiffly, leaning in. Are you plotting something, again, Professor Rosier? Cassian smiled pleasantly, slicing into meat. Me, Professor? I am simply enjoying the festivities. Bath's Haida sipped her drink. Cassian thought the highlight of the evening would be the pumpkin over Snape's head, rigged to explode the moment someone muttered cauldron grease with enough venom, but he was wrong. The doors slammed open. He didn't even look up at first, just chewed on the rest of his parsnip. These things rarely merited rushing. A moment later though, he was proven wrong again. Quirrell came sprinting down the aisle, perhaps mistaking the Great Hall for a Quidditch pitch. Turban askew. Face chalk white. The whole lot trembling like he just kissed a troll. Quirrell stumbled to the staff table and choked out, Troll, in the dungeon, thought you ought to know. Then he fainted. Right there, full splat onto the stone. Cassian winced, then announced, Ah! Style points, 3. Dramatic flair, 10. Still, he shifted forward in his seat. Trolls weren't a joke. Not when castle full of children were involved. A few students screamed. Someone knocked over a goblet. The hall went from Halloween jolly to near chaos in 3 seconds flat. Cassian watched the fear spread like spilt ink, chairs scraping, kids twisting around, whispers snapping into panic. Silence. Cassian's eardrums rung. It worked though. The students froze mid-breath. Dumbledore scanned the room. Prefects and professors, lead your houses back to their dormitories immediately. Before anyone else could move, something else happened. Cassian swore he heard that ridiculous cartoon sound, Pyuah, right before the cursed pumpkin finally gave up gravity and dropped. It exploded right on Snape's greasy head. It exploded in a wet, orange splat that sent pulp splattering across 3 feet of polished table, sending bits of stringy orange straight down his collar. For one glorious second, no one breathed. Snape stood there, rigid as a tombstone, dripping pumpkin like it was part of his hair care routine. Might have been, for all anyone knew. A wet splat echoed across the hall as a chunk of pumpkin hit the floor beside him. Nobody moved. Somewhere near the Hufflepuff table, a first-year sneezed and immediately tried to disappear into her robes. Draco Malfoy looked like he wanted to laugh but couldn't decide if the risk to his bloodline was worth it. Neville Longbottom gone sheet white, like the trauma of witnessing a fruit-based assassination had shattered what remained of his nerves. Ketlebin, the calmest by far, kept chewing his steak and huffed. That is going to stain, he said, watching a rivulet of pumpkin juice trail ominously down Snape's sleeve. Bath's Haida buried her face in her goblet, shoulders shaking. Professor Sprout was failing not to smirk behind her serviette. Flitwick looked like he was mentally composing a haiku. Even Trelawney, who spent the first half of dinner describing everyone's imminent demise via turnip, was staring as though a prophecy had just fulfilled itself. Snape, meanwhile, did nothing. He merely stood. Perfectly still. Emotionless. Like a man who had decided to internalize this betrayal so deeply he might one day turn into a potion. The shock, the troll, the fainted defense professor, and the pumpkin-flavored catastrophe all collided into something so absurd Cassian snorted a laugh. A proper, involuntary sort of snort that would have got him smacked with a napkin if Bath's Haida had any left. Snape's eyes snapped to him first. Of course they did. Cassian was the only person within 10 feet not frozen in horror or hurrying to look useful. Sorry, Cassian managed to say, breathing loudly to suppress the laughter. The pumpkin just. He gestured vaguely toward the dripping mess that used to be Snape's hair. I mean, look at you. You are glowing. Girl, whatever you use for that hair, mmm. Snape didn't blink. Just stood there, murder in his posture, strands of pulp sliding down his collar. He looked like a cursed salad. McGonagall's hand clapped against the table. Professor Rosier, she hissed. To Cassian's relief, laughter spread to students. Snape, of course, caught the sound like a dog catches scent. His eyes swept the great hall, daring anyone to breathe wrong. Then Dumbledore, far too casual for a man about to be hexed in the crossfire, waved his hand. To your common rooms. Now. Professor Rosier, you will guide Slytherin, since Professor Snape has had an accident. Cassian clapped his hands. Excellent. Field trip, children. Let's make it snappy before your head of house drowns in pumpkin. Snape's gaze was venomous, like he was updating a kill list. Cassian flashed a grin on the way out. If you find seeds in your boot later, Severus, do let me know. I hear they are lucky. The Slytherins didn't argue. When a troll gets mentioned and a professor goes down like a sack of wet towels, even the proudest purebloods learn to queue. Cassian herded them with lazy gestures and a few pointed looks. A second year tried to linger near the pudding table. He got steered by the collar. Cassian led the green and silver train through the corridors, occasionally nudging stragglers. Once they rounded the last corner and the entrance to the common room opened, Cassian gave them a little wave. Inside. No fireballs, no summoning circles, and if anyone gets cursed, try not to bleed on the upholstery. A couple of them mumbled something vaguely grateful. Most just bolted. Cassian turned toward the long corridor. He squinted, searching the dim hall for answers, then muttered, now that I think about it, why the hell did Dumbledore send the Slytherins to their common room when Quirrell said the troll was in the dungeon? He made his way down the dungeon corridor, eyes scanning the stone walls for anything even mildly troll-shaped. Nothing. No roar, no smell, not even a misplaced footprint. Either Quirrell had hallucinated it, or the troll had excellent stealth training. As he looped past the first-floor staircase, he spotted two heads ducked behind the far archway, barely visible in the shadows. Messy, jet-black hair and Ron's unmistakable mop of orange. Cassian narrowed his eyes and kept walking until he was close enough to loom. What the hell are you doing? He asked, more annoyed than alarmed. Harry flinched. Ron jumped. Both looked like they'd been caught nicking sweets, not hiding from a 12-foot beast. Mr. Potter. Mr. Weasley, Cassian said, unimpressed. Out for a dungeon crawl, are we? Chapter 68, Leviosa. Mr. Potter. Mr. Weasley, Cassian said, unimpressed. Out for a dungeon crawl, are we? Ron scrambled to his feet. We were, heading back, but then. Hermione. She doesn't know about the troll. She is in the loo. Cassian stared at them, mouth parting slightly. You left a girl in the bathroom while a troll is on the loose. Harry shot a look at Ron, panicked. We didn't leave her, she didn't know. We were going to find her. Cassian sighed a tired breath and looked over his shoulder for a miracle that wasn't there. Brilliant. Sending them alone was a gamble. If the troll was still loose in the corridors, they'd only panic and might blunder straight into it. But if it really was in the bathroom, dragging two first years along would be reckless. He hesitated, torn between dangers, but leaving them behind felt worse. In the end, the safest choice was to keep them close. He turned. Right, show me. Ron blinked. You are coming. Cassian looked at him, incredulous. Yes, Weasley, I thought I would let you two handle it. Maybe throw a quill at it, see who blinks. Seeing the blank look, he jerked his chin. Move. They didn't argue. They ran. The trip to the girls' loo wasn't long, 5 corridors, 2 half-skids, and one very near collision with a suit of armor. Cassian was already regretting not bringing a mask or, better, a shovel. There was a distinct stink in the air now. Sharp, sour, and heavy. Not a lavatory scent. Worse. A troll. As they neared the corner, a crash shook the tiles. One of the sinks inside the girls' loo screamed its death rattle. Something grunted. Something huge. The door had been torn off its hinges. The stone threshold was cracked. Inside, the troll loomed, grey, leathery, and profoundly stupid-looking, its back to them, club raised mid-air. Hermione was cornered near the last stall. Frozen. Clutching the edge of the basin for her dear life. Before Cassian could even move, Harry yelled, "Look here, you big oaf! Come after me if you dare!" The troll stopped mid-swing, one thick foot scraping sideways as it turned, blinking at Harry like he just insulted its mum. Cassian didn't wait. He stepped in front of the duo, wand up, quick flick, glaceum. The spell sparked blue and snapped off the troll's shoulder like rain on stone. "Lovely," he muttered. "We are dealing with thick skin and thicker skull." Another flick. Conf Ringo. That one hit square in the chest. Troll stumbled a step, snorted, then sneezed like it had smelled its own armpit. No burn. Barely a dent. Cassian sidestepped, pulling the two behind, as the troll's club whooshed past and cracked a basin in two. Hermione scrambled sideways, clutching the wall. Harry and Ron bolted left, flanking the troll without any real plan other than not dying. The creature turned, growling, swiping its club across the broken tiles. Reducto. Cassian shouted a stronger spell, this time aimed at the creature's leg. It bounced off the shin. "Oh, what is that leg made of, petrified meatloaf?" Harry ducked under a swing. Ron tripped over his own foot and smacked into the wall. The troll bellowed and lurched forward. Club raised. Hermione snapped, "Do something." Ron's wand jerked up. Wingardium Leviosa. Cassian was already shouting, "It is Leviosa, not, don't add a bloody consonant." Hermione echoed him from the floor. "It is Wingardium Leviosa." Ron's grip tightened. He shouted it again, cleaner this time. "Wingardium Leviosa." The troll's club twitched. Then lifted. Up. Straight up. Troll blinked at it like it was mugged by gravity. It hovered there, then lost control of his spell. The club dropped. Straight onto the troll's head. It made a sound like a pumpkin splitting under a boot. The troll wobbled. Stared. Then dropped, legs buckling as it face-planted. Face first into the mess. Silence. Cassian straightened slowly, wand still raised. Bits of ceiling dust drifted through the air like lazy snow. Someone's shoe squelched in a puddle. Harry leaned over, breathing hard. Ron looked pale. Hermione was pressed into the wall, cheeks blotchy, eyes wide. Cassian stepped around the unconscious troll, sidestepping the troll spit. He looked down at the mess of face and club and slowly let out a breath. "Well," he said, "that is one way to defeat a troll." Harry wiped his face on his sleeve. "Is it, dead?" Cassian crouched, tapped the troll's skull with the end of his wand. Dull thunk. "Nope. Brain is still rattling around in there. Probably looking for the exit." Hermione was still clutching the sink. Ron stared at his wand, surprised it could do that. I didn't think it would work." "Neither did I," Cassian said, dusting off his sleeve. "But I am thrilled to be wrong. Mark the date." Harry glanced at Hermione. "Are you all right?" She nodded stiffly. Her hands trembled. Cassian waved a hand, "Right. No time for hugs. We got a troll in a loo and 3 students who should be upstairs. That is a paperwork nightmare." Before they could leave, 2 things happened. First, Cassian felt it. Like someone flicked a switch behind his eyes. Magic shifted in him, familiar, strange, and utterly textbook. His mastery on Wingardium Leviosa jumped a level. It wasn't the same as casting it himself over and over, this was from teaching it. This kind of increase usually took weeks. A few dozen classroom hours. This felt like a cheat code. That was odd. Not unwelcome, but odd. Second, McGonagall swept into the ruined bathroom with the energy of a woman fully prepared to ban students from existence. Snape followed, looking like he scented blood and wanted to bottle it. Quirrell trailed behind, still trembling, turban half askew, wide-eyed as if expecting the troll to resurrect. The 3 of them stopped dead. 1 very unconscious troll. 1 toilet in several pieces. 3 students smeared with more grime than could be justified. And Cassian. McGonagall's gaze snapped to him, then to 3 students. "Explain yourself. Right now." Hermione stepped forward. "It was my fault, Professor McGonagall," she said, fast and firm. I was looking for the troll. I read about them, and I thought I could handle it. Harry and Ron came to stop me. Small, stiff, still shaking a little, but refusing to look away. She stood straight. McGonagall's eyes narrowed. Miss Granger. What possessed you to think? No. No, we will address that later. She turned her attention on Harry and Ron. You two left your dormitories to follow her. Yes, said Harry. Only that. If they hadn't found me, I would be dead now. They even fetched Professor Rosier. Harry and Professor Rosier managed to slow the troll and Ron knocked it out with its own club. It was about to finish me off when they arrived. Hermione added. Harry and Ron tried to look as though this story wasn't new to them. Well, in that case, said Professor McGonagall, staring at the three of them. Miss Granger, you foolish girl, how could you think of tackling a mountain troll on your own? Hermione hung her head. Miss Granger, 5 points will be taken from Gryffindor for this, said Professor McGonagall. I am very disappointed in you. If you are not hurt at all, you would better get off to Gryffindor Tower. Students are finishing the feast in their houses. Hermione nodded, hanging her head low. McGonagall turned to Harry and Ron. Well, I still say you were lucky, but not many first years could have taken on a full-grown mountain troll. You each win Gryffindor 5 points. Professor Dumbledore will be informed of this. You may go. They hurried out of the chamber. McGonagall opened her mouth. Her brow twitched. Professor Rosier. Cassian gave a shrug. Caught them halfway through a heroic rescue attempt. Not ideal timing, granted. I followed them. Arrived just in time to help. Snape's eyes were on the troll. You let students. He began. Cassian cut him off, gesturing a hush with one hand like swatting a fly. Didn't let anything. Just, okay. Snape's jaw moved like it wanted to file a complaint. Honestly, Cassian muttered, do I look like someone who herds children into troll territory for fun? No, don't answer that. Well, Snape was barely listening to him. He looked too excited for the troll to argue about anything else once McGonagall gave him permission to dissect it. He didn't say anything, just leaned forward like the mess on the floor had whispered sweet nothings to him. Right, Cassian said, stepping over whatever gooey covered the ground, and that is my cue. He left before someone handed him a mop. No thanks. Not even for 10 points to effort. As he entered his room, Bath's Haida was already there, perched on the arm of the chair, flipping through something that looked suspiciously like one of his lesson plans. Troll is down, Cassian said, shedding his coat on a chair. Toilet is ruined. Snape is wet. You are welcome. She didn't look up. Snape is what? Cassian rubbed his face with both hands. I don't know how else to explain the expression. McGonagall said he could dissect the troll for potions. He looked thrilled. Got that look again, you know. She huffed a laugh, shaking her head, then closed the folder. You were gone a while. Ah yes. Took a detour through the worst group project in Hogwarts history. Potter, Weasley, and Granger tried their hands at troll hunting. Managed not to die, which I count as a win. He threw himself onto her with all the coordination of a flailing wardrobe. She kicked him off without blinking. He hit the floor with a grunt and a flurry of limbs, landing hard on his side. Cold. Cassian wheezed from the rug, arms splayed, glaring up like she just betrayed a sacred peace treaty. Bath's Haida didn't dignify that with a reply, just slid off the couch and onto him, dragging the blanket as she went. It half covered his legs by the time she landed, elbow jammed somewhere near his ribs. He groaned theatrically, wrapping an arm around her waist and tugging her closer. You think a troll could manage its way from the dungeons up to the first floor girls' loo without at least 3 people noticing the smell? Her head was tucked under his chin, hair tickling his collarbone. Doubt, she mumbled. Thought so. He kissed the top of her head, fingers playing absently with the edge of her shirt. So why did Quirrell say it was in the dungeons, then? Don't worry, I'll keep lecturing into the void. Historians are good at shouting into abysses. Comes with the job. Chapter 69, Soaked. Why did Quirrell say it was in the dungeons, then? Bath's Haida hummed, but didn't answer. Her head was still tucked under his jaw, fingers idly tracing something on his chest, maybe a rune, maybe a to-do list, maybe the death of the Roman Empire. Hard to tell with her. She went quiet like that sometimes when something bothered her. Cassian knew the rhythm of it by now. All right, he said. What is the theory? Bathsheba didn't meet his eye. If Quirrell got it wrong, it means he wanted the staff out of the way. Or at least, not where the troll actually was. Which was the first floor, Lou, Cassian muttered, rubbing a thumb against his temple. Popular spot tonight. She didn't smile. He squinted up at the ceiling. It had a water stain shaped like a toad, foreshadowing. Maybe. Could have been panic, he offered. He is not exactly a steel trap under pressure. Even panic gets the floor right, she murmured. He said dungeon. Said it clearly. Cassian sighed through his nose. That itch at the back of his brain got worse. You think he brought the troll in? She shrugged. Would explain a lot. He squinted. Might have lost control of the thing mid-transfer. Trolls weren't known for grace, couldn't charm one into quiet. Cassian knew Quirrell was planning to bring one in, part of that idiot-proof secret room of the third-floor secret club. Heard it himself when Dumbledore asked. Quirrell had even sounded proud, like hiring a 12-foot sledgehammer was his idea of strategic brilliance. Cassian hadn't thought much of it at the time. Just another crazy plan in the Tower of Please let no child survive this trial. But now, a troll had smashed its way through Hogwarts plumbing. And the timing, the location, none of it added up. He only had a vague hunch and the troll incident. Nothing concrete, nothing that would pass for proof in any respectable dueling court. But Cassian couldn't tell Bathsheba. Dumbledore had been clear, absolutely not. You think Dumbledore knew? Bathsheba kept doodling a love letter on his skin. He asked me to lead Slytherin to the dungeons, Cassian muttered. When the troll was supposed to be there. Still nothing. Not even a scoff. That was worrying. I mean, I know he is a bit fond of chaos, Cassian went on, eyes fixed on the ceiling stain, but unless he wanted Slytherins practicing troll evasion for house points, I don't see the logic. Bathsheba pushed herself upright, blanket falling around her waist. Her hair was a mess of ink-dark strands, one of his jumpers slipping off her shoulder. She didn't seem to notice. You don't trust him? She asked. Cassian blinked at her. Dumbledore. She nodded. I trust him to lie artfully and occasionally throw children at problems he should probably solve himself, Cassian said, sitting up with a grunt. So yes. In the limited way one trusts a theatrical arsonist. Bathsheba gave him a flat look. That is not an answer. Cassian shrugged. He told me to bring the kids downstairs. Quirrell says there is a troll in the dungeon. He rubbed the back of his neck. The spot was sore. He was probably straining his neck just to avoid coming face to face with the troll's belly. Yeah, belly. Either the headmaster is hoping to control the population or he knew troll was never there. Bathsheba pushed him down, locking him between her legs, hands braced on either side of his head. Probably knew, she said, eyes narrowed. There is little goes under Dumbledore's nose in this castle. Cassian looked up at her, wincing. You are a lot more terrifying when you are right side up. Can you at least pretend I've got bones? You do. She shifted her weight to make it worse. They are currently groaning under my thigh. He groaned properly now, head thunking back against the floor. Excellent. Murdered by thighs. Her gaze had gone sharp, still chasing the idea through the dark. I am serious. You think he didn't have portraits watching every corridor the moment Quirrell started screaming? Cassian winced and pointed up. Could we take this theorizing somewhere not made of stone? She kissed his lips, fierce, hot, no warning. No, she muttered against his mouth. You are hot when you are in pain. And scheming. Cassian made a muffled noise that might have been protest or agreement. Hard to tell. One hand slid to her waist. The other found the back of her knee and gave it a tug, pulling her down harder on top of him. She made a small sound, indignant, pleased, probably both, and bit his lip for the trouble. When he woke up the next morning, Cassian wanted to die. Not in the dramatic, existential sort of way, more in the my spine has liquefied and I might be part of the floor now sort of way. He was still on the floor. Bathsheba was still on him. Worse, their combined effort at body heat had dried into something tacky and unholy across his back. His vest felt like parchment left in the rain. He shifted and immediately regretted it. A muscle in his side twinged like it had forgotten how to exist. His neck cracked so loud, it could wake the castle. Bathsheba didn't move. Probably dead. Or pretending. Either option was valid. Cassian let out another miserable groan. We are disgusting. Her answer was a soft snore. He reached and patted the nearest bit of her. You are complicit in this crime against hygiene. Just so we are clear. She didn't stir. Typical. He got the troll, the children, and the floor rash. She got warmth and plausible deniability. He rolled her off like a sack of potatoes and dragged himself upright. His back popped in 3 separate places. Socks still on. One sock inside out. His wand had vanished somewhere beneath the pile of discarded blanket and humanity, probably in a crevice. Right. Morning sorted. He stumbled toward the sink in the corner and caught his reflection. Hair looked like it'd been hexed mid-storm. His vest properly wrinkled, half damp. Eyes bloodshot. He looked like the prelude to a cautionary tale. Behind him, Bathsheba groaned and flopped onto her back, arm draped over her eyes. What time is it? Cassian checked the window. Late enough to be suspicious. Early enough to regret everything. She sighed and kicked the blanket off with one foot. I hate you. Good. That means I am winning. She squinted at him through a curtain of hair. You look terrible. He bent his back. I am aware. The floor was unkind. Serves you right. Who collapses mid-conspiracy? I was seduced, he said flatly, by a woman with violent thighs. Bathsheba rolled onto her side and flicked a pen at his head. It missed. Barely. Cassian rinsed his face with cold water. Somewhere above, a plumbing charm clicked into life with a cough. You think Dumbledore is actually going to mention the troll thing again? He asked, voice muffled in the towel. Nope. She yawned. He will let the whole school think it was a tragic one-off. One rogue creature, conveniently timed. Nothing to see here. Cassian dropped the towel. Of course he will. He flopped onto the edge of the couch. You reckon we are done with surprises for the week? Bathsheba raised an eyebrow. You've worked here how long? He grunted. Optimism is a disease. She kicked him in the thigh. Lightly. Meaning, she loved him. He had to show his love as well. So, he carried her to the bathroom and chucked her into the basin, clothes and all. There was a splash, a shriek, and a slap of limbs against porcelain. It is cold. She yelped mid-air. Oops, Cassian said, without an ounce of remorse. She came up soaked and swearing, hair plastered to her forehead, shirt clinging in unfortunate ways. He had half a second to feel proud before her hand shot out, grabbed his wrist, and yanked. Don't you, bloody hell! Water hit hard. He landed half on, half in, knees knocking against the basin's edge as she dragged him in by force and vengeance. Cassian sputtered, blinked the water out of his eyes, and grabbed the edge for leverage. Are you possessed? You started it. I started civilization. This is war. Bathsheba shoved his shoulder until his head dunked under again. He came up coughing, hair dripping, coat ruined. She laughed, with zero grace, just teeth and breath and full-bodied amusement as she leaned back against the basin wall like a victorious general in soaking socks. He stared at her, deadpan. Are you done? House elves are going to salt this room. Not yet, she said, and dunked his head again. He came up with a hand on her hip and dragged her down into his lap, sloshing water over the sides. She didn't resist, mostly because she was too busy trying not to laugh into his face. He hooked an arm around her waist. Now that you've staged a minor flood in the name of petty vengeance, shall we call this bath concluded? She wiped her face with the end of his sleeve. You dunked me. You threw me. You dunked me while I was still gloating. Which is why it was justified. He narrowed his eyes. Bold words for someone soaked. She snorted. Water splashed again. The basin was too small for 2 adults and 1 grudge. One of them was going to get bruised. Probably both. She tipped her head back, hair trailing along his shoulder, steam rising off her skin now that the charm had warmed the water. What are we even doing? Being profoundly irresponsible, he said. Thought so. They sat there, back to chest, breathing heavy. You'd think after resurrecting entire lost spells in front of an audience, I'd at least get polite applause. Chapter 70, Game On. Snape looked like someone had slipped lemon juice into his morning tea, but with just the faintest glimmer of smugness under the scowl. Probably sniffed a bit of troll spleen before bed. That would lift his mood for at least a month. Cassian lifted his mug. Good to see you dry, Severus. Snape didn't answer. At the Gryffindor table, Weasley was claiming he distracted the troll by throwing its own snot at it, which didn't even make sense, biologically. Cassian watched their table. Granger hadn't touched her breakfast. Potter was whispering something to her. She nodded eventually. She clearly felt both grateful and guilty. That wasn't a good combination for a 12-year-old. Cassian considered reminding her that her friends hadn't been in danger because of her, but because they'd wanted to help her. There was a difference. He didn't correct her when she took the blame, as he realized it was a growing moment for her, and he was even a little proud to see Granger lying to a professor, McGonagall of all people. Still, if it started to turn into something ugly, he knew he'd have to step in. That kind of guilt, if left unchecked, could harden into something dangerous, the sort that drove a child to overcompensate. He could already see it, a girl who would triple-check her every decision, never to trust her gut again, who'd throw herself between danger and the people she cared about, not because she was fearless, but because she refused to feel this helpless again. It could make her brilliant, resourceful, and utterly exhausting to herself. November 3rd was cold enough to make Cassian rethink the whole open-air sports tradition. Again. He sat hunched in the professor's box, coat collar up, scarf wrapped like a tactical defense, and a look on his face that said he would rather be reading cursed Sumerian tablets than watching teenagers throw themselves off brooms. Wait, that wasn't a good comparison. He would rather read them any day. Baths Haida, seated beside him with a thermos that suspiciously steamed of something stronger than tea, nudged his arm. You still don't like it? She asked, just as Lee Jordan's voice rang out, introducing the new Gryffindor Seeker. Cassian huffed like a kid dragged to church on Sunday morning. It is a game designed to glorify Seekers. McGonagall was 3 seats down, tartan hat at maximum fluff, eyes already sparkling with unholy Gryffindor pride. Cassian said it like he either didn't notice her or didn't care. She was the kind of fan who treated Quidditch like war strategy. One wrong word and she would have him hexed into the next House Cup. What do you mean? She asked, in hush, because Cassian's face already had that look, half smug, half tired of everyone else's nonsense. He shrugged. Game continues until a Seeker catches the snitch. Snitch is worth 150 points. So unless one team got that exact margin of lead or more, which they rarely do, the Seeker decides everything. She blinked at him. That is the point, isn't it? It is like watching 14 musicians play a symphony, but the bloke with the triangle wins if he dings it first. He leaned forward a little, they could be 50 points up, 2 bludgeons to the face, an arm dangling off, and none of it matters. If Seeker sneezes on the snitch, they win. Baths Haida sipped her suspicious tea. So what, you want it to be fair? I want it to make sense, Cassian muttered. Below them, the teams shot out onto the pitch in a blur of red and green. The crowd roared. Cassian winced. Lee Jordan's voice cracked through the air. Names were shouted, stats no one cared about blasted across the stands, and somewhere a third year released a lion-shaped charm that promptly tried to eat a snake banner. Cassian barely glanced at it. Great. Another symbolic murder. Baths Haida nudged him. You are being grumpy. It is a tradition and fun. Cassian turned to look at her like she just confessed to enjoying midterm grading. Really? It is fun to watch a game that might never end. Okay. Now I get your point. Below them, the brooms shot across the pitch in erratic arcs, chasing after a ball half the stadium couldn't even see. The quaffle got past, bludgeons got dodged, a Slytherin beater nearly took out his own keeper. Cheers erupted every few seconds, no one really tracking the score, just reacting to whatever Jordan shouted loudest. Cassian took another sip and grimaced. And they say history is chaotic. Baths Haida leaned into him. You hate this less than you pretend. Don't slander me, he said. I am entirely consistent in my contempt. Below, Marcus Flint elbowed a Gryffindor chaser so hard it knocked the poor girl sideways off course. The stands howled, half in outrage, half in encouragement. No foul was called. Cassian gestured at the pitch. That was assault. Baths Haida didn't even flinch. That was Quidditch. He glanced at Madame Hooch, squinting through her flying goggles. The rules are a rumor, and someone is definitely going to hospital by the end. Bath's Haida raised her thermos. Cheers to that. He took another swig from his own, the spiced warmth doing a poor job of compensating. A roar went up as Fred, or maybe George, Cassian couldn't be arsed to keep them straight, dodged a bludger and spun mid-air. A Greyfinder in the crowd let off a charm that fired red sparks over the pitch, promptly getting hexed by a very fed-up Ravenclaw 6th year. Then, like someone yanked a string, the entire stadium leaned forward at once. The snitch had appeared, glimmering just above the Slytherin goalpost before vanishing again into a blur of motion. Harry Dove. Then Harry's broom started to wobble. Cassian squinted. That is not wind. The broom pitched left, then right, too sharp, like it had decided to throw him off mid-flight. Harry clung to it with both hands, legs kicking as the broom bucked under him. Below, the rest of the players hadn't noticed yet. The game carried on, quaffle flying, bludgers dodged, someone screamed as a bat clipped a helmet. But all eyes in the professor's box turned now to Potter, who was twisting in mid-air, clearly trying not to be flung to his death by school-issued transport. Cassian looked around. Too many people, half the pitch was up and screaming, the other half craning their necks. His eyes schemed the stands, trying to spot a wand out, someone muttering, anything. But there were robes everywhere, flags, hats shaped like lions and snakes, floating sweets, someone waving enchanted foam fingers, nothing useful. Potter's broom kept jerking sideways like it was trying to buck him off. Just as he was about to shout something, possibly someone get Potter down before he eats turf, a sudden flicker caught his eye. Flames burst into life near the staff seats. Cassian turned, squinting through wind and screaming, and saw a spark gutter into full fire right by Snape. Robes licking up like someone had hexed a candle into his arse. He stood. Not because he was feeling helpful, Snape could fall into a pit and he would send a polite note to his family, maybe a fruit basket, but because he saw a Gryffindor student, suddenly ducked out of sight, bushy hair trailing behind her. Bit of a sprint down the rows. Cassian caught only a flash of her scarf feet and hair, as she disappeared under the seats. Snape was flailing now, stomping, trying to smother it with the edge of his cloak while simultaneously not looking like he cared anyone could see him panic. He hissed something, batted out the rest of the flames with a snarl, and sat back down, his hem singed. Cassian blinked. Potter's broom stopped shaking. Cassian blinked again. Lee Jordan shouted something about the match ending, but he didn't catch the exact words. The stadium was too loud, voices piling on top of each other. He looked up just in time to see Potter spitting out the snitch like it was a hairball into his hand. Gryffindors went feral. Scarves flew, hats launched. Madame Hooch didn't even get the chance to blow her whistle before she was swarmed by half the red and gold section, all screaming. McGonagall looked positively euphoric, hands clasped, smile wide. Cassian made a mental note to never mock Gryffindor tactics in her hearing again. Or at least not without a 3-exit escape plan. He tracked his eyes towards the staff exit, catching the flutter of dark robes as Snape slipped through. Still smoking faintly at the hem. Think he realized who set him on fire? He asked. If he didn't, he is losing his edge. Cassian didn't argue. He watched as Hermione Granger emerged from under the stands, smoothing her skirt and brushing ash from her jumper. The girl didn't look triumphant. Just wary. He tucked that away. Later problem. Right now, the match was technically over, and the stadium was turning into a circus. Jordan was still shouting, mostly nonsense at this point, something about Potter's digestive prowess and the record for youngest snitch ingestion. Someone behind Cassian started a chant. It was loud, off-key, and had far too many syllables for a proper cheer. Cassian stood and stretched. We done here. Bath's Haida nodded and rose. You think anyone will question the broom thing? Probably not. And he was right, no one talked about it. Most just chalked it up to Harry's inexperience, first time on a broom, nerves, maybe a stomach spell gone wrong. A few muttered something about faulty equipment. Filch was already poking around the broom shed. Probably didn't know Harry's broom was special. But no one asked the obvious question. Why a school-approved broom had suddenly tried to murder its rider in mid-air. I once saw a student drool on their desk and at least it was feedback. Silence, meanwhile, is just silence.
Thanks for listening.